The Summer Isles. A place that, just by the sound of it, brings to mind the polar, solar opposite of what much of A Song of Ice and Fire has been slowly and inexorably building towards. A long night to a mega winter. We hope the books will end with some kind of summer. And we know it won't be overwhelmingly joyous because George has said that. He's said bittersweet is the emotional ending he's aiming for. In that sense, the Summer Islands are almost a goal, an aspiration, if an unreachable one, in terms of what we might hope Westerosi culture looks like when it's said and done. And I don't just mean in terms of weather, though that's obviously a big deal. Not just because they might not have been impacted much or at all by the original Long Night, which is a pretty interesting tidbit to consider in this episode, but how they live. Their value systems are, shall we say, more civilized in many ways. By that, I mean, simply speaking, they produce happier individuals, people who are more likely to live lives free from suffering and less likely to inflict suffering on others. They arguably have a more sophisticated view of sex, and they definitely have a better way of handling warfare and violence on a cultural level. Not to mention they have superior technology in many areas, especially shipbuilding, navigation, and associated ideas. This is in part because their culture is not overwhelmed by constant violence, and they are pretty far out there. You know, sailing is a natural evolution of a culture that lives so far away from everybody else. They provide quite a contrast to Westeros despite this, because even all that said, violence is a huge part of who they are. They are humans, after all, but it's still a big contrast because they're less so. It's a point of comparison, the Summer Islands is, in a lot of ways. They are opposite extremes. Much of this is rooted in environment. Geography does play a huge role. If God was a therapist, they'd say, this culture needs less therapy than most. Those Westerosi, however, they need a lot of therapy. And we see this positive influence in action when Sam and Gilly and Aemon catch a ride on the Cinnamon Wind, and especially Sam and Gilly are deeply impacted by just hanging out with regular Summer Islanders. It's a rare glimpse, the Cinnamon Wind scenes, where we get to see a non-Westerosi culture doing just non-Westerosi things, just day-to-day normal people stuff, and the Westerosi who are there observing it are in the small minority. So it's really different, and they're not nobility either, so they're just regular Summer Islanders living their lives. We don't get a lot like that. George R. Martin himself lives in the American Southwest. It's not where he was born, but it is where he's settled. And I bet if he had to live in his own world, he would also choose the southwest of Planetos, not the southwest of Westeros, although that's probably the best place there if you want to pick like the Arbor or something like that. But why not choose the Summer Isles, right? The southwest of Planetos. That's where the maps place it, essentially. But this is George, and he is a realist, if not nothing else. Plenty of the Summer Islanders out there are villainous or evil. We've seen them in fighting pits, sellsword companies. Some of the sellswords are brave companions. We've seen them as pirates, slavers, you name it. So yeah, this isn't some whitewashed culture that's all one way. No, it's very diverse and produces people of all kinds. But by and large, those individuals operate away from the islands, out of the world where violent behavior is less tolerated, right? There's more profit to be made being a violent person elsewhere in the world. If you're going to make your living through violence, the Summer Islands is not a great place for that. So just in essence, that shows what kind of environment we're dealing with. Of course, we're going to analyze a lot of this. That's always our focus, right? But this is more of a tour in a lot of ways, this episode, a collection of lore and characters and thoughts regarding the Summer Islands. A Song of Ice and Fire may never take us there, though maybe other stories in the future in George R. Martin's world might, and maybe they will. Maybe some people will retire there at the end, or they'll flee to the Summer Isles to get away from winter. Either way, their technological advances in bows, ships, beverages, and other things have them appearing all over the story, popping up in interesting places, and we've got all that and more on this episode of History of Westeros podcast. Hello and welcome back, everybody. It's time for another fun one here we've got for you. If you're watching live, it must be 3 p.m. Eastern on a Sunday, because that is when we go live when there's not a TV show on. That's right. So 3 o'clock is where we do our live streams. Afterwards, you can catch them on Spotify as an edited video or anywhere you catch podcasts. You can find us. Also, if you want to catch us on Patreon, you get the episodes ad-free. Save a little time, move through the episodes a little faster, and support us while you're doing it. That's patreon.com/History of Westeros. Thanks to Nina. Shout out to goodqueenally.tumblr.com. She's doing great things as usual. She helped us a lot with this episode, gave us a couple of good takes. She's also working on a Ryam red wine episode that I think will be a lot of fun. We'll get to that at some point this year. And also the latest blog post over there, she got asked a really interesting question. What was Asha's upbringing like? Before the Greyjoy Rebellion happened, she would have been on track to maybe be like a lot of other Westerosi noble girls, to be maybe married off somewhere. What was Balon's plan for her before things changed? Before, two of his older sons died and Theon was taken as a hostage. So yeah, that's a good question. Check out goodqueenally.tumblr.com for the answer. And if you have questions for us, certainly hit us up live with that if you're watching us live, or message us at westeroshistory@gmail.com or anywhere you catch us on social media. At the end of this episode, I'll mention some episodes that relate to this one. There's quite a few. It's a long list, as often the world building overview episodes do that, because we touch on so many different subjects and different little tidbits here and there. It ends up overlapping with a lot of our catalog. So I've got a long list at the end of the episode. Also, at the end of this episode is the answer to this trivia question. We learn Golden Heart, the wood Golden Heart, is the second best material for bows in the world of Planetos. Golden Heart, of course, comes from the Summer Isles. Only Dragonbone is a superior material for making bows. We've only seen one person in the series use a Dragonbone bow. Who is that? Who has used a Dragonbone bow in A Song of Ice and Fire? Answer at the end. All right, we have a lot of visuals and quotes in this episode. So if you are someone that mostly just listens, this might be a good episode for you to peek at the video, especially if you watch on Spotify or listen on Spotify, because you can just click the video feed on whenever we're talking about something visual. Click it back off if you don't want to use the bandwidth, or just leave it in the background and glance at the screen whenever we talk about something visual.
And the Spotify video is just as edited as the Spotify podcast audio you get.
That's right. It's a bit higher quality than these live streams because, Shea edits it and tweaks it up, fixes it, gives it a little run through and makes it sound better. So yeah, good call. Let me read the section headers for today. These are all the different subjects we'll be talking about. First mention, as usual, we start with that very often. Then geography, the Isles of Willano, Jala, and Umburu. Those are the main 3 isles there. Then there's other islands, because there's over 50. Exports and imports, Golden Heart, flora and fauna, ancient history, the talking trees, the age of exploration, gods and worship, war and slavery, the swan ships, Sothoryos, since the conquest, and then we're going to talk about a whole bunch of characters, including Jalabhar Xho, the Cinnamon Wind, all the characters on that, Black Balaq, Tal Toraq, Chataya, and Alayaya. Then we'll have our quote of the week, and then finish with some other characters, and then end with Sarella Sand and her mother, who was Summer Islander, and then an outro, and that'll be our episode. Hope you enjoy. Let's get to it with that first mention. In her first chapter, Daenerys goes to be introduced to Drogo for the first time, and as she looks around at the gathered guests, she has an observation or two. She realizes it's a majority of Dothraki, but, quote,
"Yet among them moved bravos and sellswords from Pentos and Myr and Tyrosh, a red priest even fatter than Illyrio, hairy men from the port of Ibn, and lords from the Summer Isles with skin as black as ebony. Daenerys looked at them all in wonder, and realized, with a sudden start of fear, that she was the only woman there."
That's mostly true for our purposes until later in the books as well. I mean, we have Alayaya, Chataya, Kojja Mo, but most of the Summer Islanders we encounter are men. Now, some of this might be a facet of early world building. By that I mean, George clearly had some idea what the Summer Isles would be like here. He's obviously writing them as black. He's writing them as feathery and like very colorful. You know, he's had some ideas, and the Summer Isles tells you a lot about the geography of the place. It's obviously a warm place. But at this point, George hadn't even drawn a map of Westeros, let alone what's in Essos and beyond. And of course, Summer Isles is neither. It's its own place that isn't associated with any continent. So George may not have fully fleshed out their relative gender equality. I mean, it's not total, but there is more equality in the Summer Isles than elsewhere. Maybe if he had to do over again, there might have been a princess among here as well. And he probably wouldn't have called them lords from the Summer Isles either, because we don't really have that. But that's fine, because Dany doesn't know better. Dany would think of them as lords because she doesn't know that they're a principality. She's 12 in this scene, so it makes sense that there's a little bit of unreliable narrator here, which helps serve to obscure some of what George may not have finished developing yet. The feathered cloaks, like I said, these guys aren't wearing the feathered cloaks, but we see them almost right away because she sees one for sale in Vaste Dothrak at the market that the caravans bring in there. So that was clearly an early piece of the world building. But yeah, in the long run, we do learn that the Summer Isles are an exception in many ways. They kind of stand out even in this scene, but yeah, part of that is the treatment of gender, but there's a lot of other things too. And that, in turn, the treatment of gender is rooted a lot in the treatment of sexuality, which is very different. They have a religious enshrinement of how they handle sexuality, which serves to solidify it, make it traditional and take root and last through the ages. It wasn't just like a trend or a short-term cultural thing. No, it's religiously enshrined, and that's why it has longevity. They're an isolated people, but also experts at seamanship. Those two things kind of go together, though not all isolated peoples on planet Earth have become good at seamanship. So it's certainly not a foregone conclusion. It's just something that makes sense. So navigation and trade, very common professions in the Summer Isles. And from there, let's go to another example. Here's Tyrion II of Game of Thrones on his way to the Wall. Quote,
"On the 18th night of their journey, the wine was a rare sweet amber from the Summer Isles that he had brought all the way north from Casterly Rock, and the book a rumination on the history and properties of dragons. With Lord Eddard Stark's permission, Tyrion had borrowed a few rare volumes from the Winterfell library and packed them for the ride north."
We're generally told that the finest wines in Westeros come from Dorne and the Arbor, which are the farthest south. And in real life, wine from grapes isn't really made in tropical regions. It's kind of a peculiarity of wine that part of their growth cycle needs to be during a coolish, temperate time, and then they finish their growth cycle when it's warmer. So it's ideal climate for wine was called Mediterranean climate. And of course, the Summer Islands are not that. Again, he hadn't drawn the maps by this point, though, but he again also had called them the Summer Isles. So he clearly had tropical in mind. So in that sense, we should guess that this is not grape wine. And in the world of Ice and Fire, sure enough, we hear that an export from the Summer Isles is palm wine, which is really sweet and is not made from grapes. It's made from palm sap from a variety of different types of palm trees. There's many, many different types of palm trees, and the sap from these different palm trees creates different types of palm wine. So this is probably what Tyrion was drinking, was palm wine. It's just rare and sweet, which absolutely, it's very sweet. It's made from sap, and it's kind of a fun take from the real world here. Palm wine can ferment in like 2 hours. It can become 4% alcohol in 2 hours. It also turns to vinegar really quickly too. So yeah, it's not something you store like in a wine cellar like grape wine would. And there's some funny nicknames for palm wine in the real world. One of them is village gin. Another is country whiskey. I kind of think of a lot of whiskey as country whiskey, but it's not all. But anyway, it's good. Or toddy. This is where the name hot toddy comes from, because a hot toddy is just a heated palm wine. It's not always that way anymore, but that's the original version. Popular in India and other places. Here's another example. Catelyn IV, A Game of Thrones arriving at King's Landing. Quote,
"Yet now the banners that flew from its battlements were golden, not black, and where the three-headed dragon had once breathed fire, now pranced the crowned stag of House Baratheon. A high-masted swan ship from the Summer Isles was beating out from port, its white sails huge with wind. The storm dancer moved past it, pulling steadily for shore.
A very minor detail, of course, but this is how world building is done. These are the little details we gather in episodes like this to paint a fuller picture. A port, especially at the capital of Westeros, is going to have people from all over, which means an opportunity for our author to provide us with examples of these other places. It's a perfect chance to show us ships from other places and to give us just a little hint of what else is out there. And he chose one of the, if not the most prolific trading cultures with the most interesting and technologically advanced sailing vessels. And the Summer Isles is memorable because it's a descriptive name. It's not a true name like Valyria or Giscari or Westeros, right? It's like the meaning of the word is what you're hearing. The Summer Islanders themselves don't call it that. When they were new to the world, when they were coming up as a people, in their infancy as a people, we know that they didn't even know there was a rest of the world. They thought the islands were their whole world. They wouldn't have called it the Summer Isles. They would have just called it the world. That's everything to them. And that name probably sticks because it would have been that way for thousands of years. They probably didn't rename the world just because they discovered there were more people in it. So they don't call it the Summer Isles, but I'm sure they also recognize that other people do. Yeah. For example, Jamaica means rich in springs. No one calls it rich in springs land. That's kind of what the Summer Isles is, but that's fine. They call it Jamaica. That's not the native name either. The Taino people were an Arawak offshoot. They're natives from the mainland, and they were the first ones to move to Jamaica from South America. But the name is actually similar. They call it like Zaymaka or Haymaka. It's Xaymaka. So it's kind of similar to Jamaica. And that also means Isle of Springs. So even the meaning is basically the same. But it's an interesting point about perspective. Like, who is naming these things? Is this the native name for it? Or is this the outsider's name for it? What do the natives call it if this is the outsider's name for it? Or what do the outsiders call it if this is the native name for it? Like, these things don't have just one universal name in a place where people don't have universal connectivity or things like the internet. And even with places like the internet, things like the internet, well, the names were invented before the internet. So you've got the different connectivity and different angles and different perspectives. So this has been true for a lot of real life peoples in the world. There's still today uncontacted tribes in, say, the extreme remote locations of the Amazon. On the other hand, these tribes tend to be effectively Stone Age, where the Summer Islanders are quite advanced. Of course, they didn't become advanced right away. They weren't advanced in a lot of ways when they discovered the rest of the world. In fact, the discovery that the world was a much bigger place than they thought is part of what spurred them on to greater technological advancement, especially with shipbuilding. Or maybe this thing about names. Maybe we should just be listening to what Olenna, the Queen of Thorns, has to say on the matter. Quote,
Marjorie, you're clever. Be a dear and tell your poor old half-daft grandmother the name of that queer fish from the Summer Isles that puffs up to 10 times its own size when you poke it.
They call them puffish, grandmother.
Of course they do. Summer Islanders have no imagination.
That's why it's just the Summer Isles. That's not a very descriptive name. No. She then goes on to say how Mace, her own son, should use a puffish as his personal sigil. So, gotta love Olenna. Here's another example. Ned for A Game of Thrones, first time he arrives at the small council chamber, freshly off of the road from traveling. Quote,
The chamber was richly furnished. Mirish carpets covered the floor instead of rushes, and in one corner 100 fabulous beasts cavorted in bright paints on a carved screen from the Summer Isles. The walls were hung with tapestries from Norvos and Qohor and Lys, and a pair of Valyrian sphinxes flanked the door, eyes of polished garnet smoldering in black marble faces.
So we're still very early in the world building, as I've been saying. I'm moving through these examples. You can clearly see the partially Caribbean-like environment he had in mind. A Caribbean, maybe part of Africa, things like that, similar equatorial range. Because of this, like these rare woods, that's a feature of places like Brazil and Africa, where the rarest woods and most sought-after woods in the world come from. And a lot of these timber industries set up in the Caribbean to do exporting. So this is a great example. George is like, okay, so what types of luxury goods are coming from these different places? Valyria, well, they got sphinxes. We got tapestries from Norvos and Cohorn Leafs, but the Summer Isles, that's where the fancy carved wood and bright paints. Colors are something we already associate with them, and the carved woods are, we do now, but at this point, this is the first time I think we see the carved wood being an important thing, and it becomes just ubiquitous as a part of the Summer Isles. So that's pretty cool. I like that. They do have the most sought after woods in the world. So George, even though it was early, he had already established that much. And what's interesting too here is that these aren't just luxury goods. These are royal luxury goods. This is what the king and queen have decorated the Red Keep with. It's the ultra most fanciest stuff they can find. And it's includes these exotic things from the Summer Isles. There's things from all over, including the Summer Isles. They're not thought of as like a lesser people. They produce extremely great luxury goods, and their work shows up in the palaces and castles of the elites. Here's another example from Sansa 2, watching the tournament in A Game of Thrones. Quote,
Jane Poole confessed herself frightened by the look of Jalabhar Xho, an exile prince from the Summer Isles who wore a cape of green and scarlet feathers over skin as dark as night.
He's actually the first person from the Summer Isles that we see. He's from Red Flower Vale, a place we've got on tap for today. Immediately you see how colorful he is, even though Jane is scared of her. Well, it doesn't say why she's scared, if it's just his skin or just the bright colors or who knows, just that he looks so different. Not the only person that reacts to seeing a black person for the first time, like, oh my gosh, I've never seen skin like that. But of course, a black person from the Isles who's never seen a white person before would probably react similarly, like, whoa, I've never seen skin color like that before. Most people aren't afraid of just different skin color, but that is a realistic thing for the occasional person to be like, whoa, I've never seen that before. So, sticking with her, Sandor escorting Sansa to her chamber. Sticking with Sansa, here we go. Quote,
Sandor Clegane stopped suddenly in the middle of a dark and empty field. She had no choice but to stop beside him. Some septa trained you well. You're like one of those birds from the Summer Isles, aren't you? A pretty little talking bird, repeating all the pretty little words they taught you to recite.
Parrots, Sandor. They're called parrots, yes. And they parrot what you teach them. Hey, that's why they're called that. You might wonder where a man like Sandor Clegane learned about parrots, but he's been around the Lannisters his whole life. I'm sure they have rich people stuff that I'm sure they've seen a parrot at least a few times, maybe several. I'm sure the Summer Islanders have tried to sell them some, right? maybe it even worked. Maybe Joanna Lannister bought a parrot. I doubt Tywin would. It would be annoying to him. He doesn't want anyone repeating his plans. Yeah, parrots are a security risk. They're like Furbies in the Pentagon. You can't have recording devices. Parrots are basically recording devices. Anyway, again, this is so clever to me. Like, looking for these little hints, and this is what makes making episodes like this for me particularly fun, is this is such a small little thing. Like, the point of this scene has nothing to do with parrots. It's just a way to refer to what Sansa's doing. But it does absolutely serve as world building. This is more little tidbits that add up to something, add up to a full picture of the Summer Isles. We've learned about the feathered cloaks. Now we know where the feathers come from. We've seen a few examples of Summer Islanders. Actually, I should correct myself. I said Jalabhar Xho is the first one we see. That's not true. We see those ones with Dany, but they are unidentified. The first one we see with a name, I should say, about Jalabhar. So We've gotten to see a few people. We've gotten to see how they dress. We've gotten to see some information about their geography, some information about their flora and fauna, and about their wood. So that's a lot without ever going there or anyone having a conversation about it. These are just a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit here. Oh, and of course, I didn't even mention in my rundown there the swan ship that Catelyn saw. So we also see that they are advanced seamen. In the Game of Thrones appendix, we hear or read that maybe here, if you listen to the audiobook, the Ironborn occasionally raid the Summer Isles. I'm guessing that, that's pretty far from them, but it's not as far as, it's about as far as like the Stepstones or other places. It's a challenging place for them to go, not just because the Summer Isles are so good at archery and at sailing themselves, but because they have to go into the open ocean to get there, and longships aren't great at that. So it is extra daring, so I doubt this is a common occurrence, and I think it's probably less common than it used to be. When the Ironborn were particularly powerful, when they ruled the west coast of Westeros, I bet the Summer Isles got raided a lot. But the Ironborn are weaker now, and even though they have to travel farther to raid because... Right? They used to be able to raid the west coast of Westeros and there's no one to stop them. Now, under the Iron Throne, if they do that, well, they get in big trouble. But back in the day, before there was an Iron Throne, they probably focused on Westeros more. So ironically, once the Iron Throne is in place and says, no, you can't raid Westeros, the Ironborn will go farther and wider. We talked about that in the Red Kraken episode. That's why the Red Kraken spent so much time in the Stepstones, because they weren't allowed to raid in Westeros. Same thing here. Some of the Ironborn probably raid the Summer Isles during the time of the Iron Throne because they weren't permitted, even by their own lords, to raid in the West. So that's something I wonder about, like how often that happens, what those encounters look like. I imagine a lot of times it doesn't go very well for the Ironborn, but surely there's some times where it did, or they would probably never do it. Maybe they're just that stubborn. Speaking of that great distance, let's talk about the geography. An easy way to describe the placement of the Summer Isles is directly south of the Narrow Sea. Don't forget the Narrow Sea is the body of water between Essos and Westeros. So just take that body of water there and just go straight south, and there you go. And here is the description. Quote.
South of Westeros, cradled in the deep blue waters of the Summer Sea, the Summer Isles bask in the warm southern sun. More than 50 islands make up this verdant archipelago. Many are so small. I'm just going to say that again. More than 50 islands make up this verdant archipelago. I was trying to make my edit easier and made it much harder. More than 50 islands make up this verdant archipelago. Many are so small a man could walk across them in an hour. But Jala, largest of the isles, stretches 200 leagues from tip to tip.
Just the tips. As a reminder, 200 leagues is 600 miles. It's 3-to-1 ratio there. The wall is 100 leagues, which is 300 miles, etc. The Sunset Sea is to the west, which is, the sun sets in the west, so that figures. And the Summer Sea is to the east. So all these seas have some colorful names. Walano and Umboru are the other two major isles next to Jala. Walano and Umboru combined are less than half the size of Jala, and each are larger than all the Stepstones combined. So they're pretty darn big. And those three islands out of the 50 have 90% of the population of the Summer Isles. We have some fun here. We got the idea to kind of go deep with our comparisons. So Shay and I played around with this this week. Comparing the Summer Isles to other Westerosi regions, she did a little Photoshop work here to kind of mash them all together, just kind of get an idea of what their total size is, and then we can overlay that on some other Westerosi regions. So, Shay, why don't you tell us where you're laying them right now?
Yeah. I did one mock-up that was kind of the shape of Dorne, so I could see what it looked like overlaid over Dorne, trying to keep, overlap at minimum and leave some gaps, because there would be lakes and rivers and such, and all of that. And as you can see, it's, I think, probably around the size or a tiny bit larger than Dorne. And then I did another mock-up, as you can see here, where I made it into like a ball shape so that we could put it over places like the Riverlands, bigger than the Riverlands, I believe, the Vale, roughly the size of the Vale, obviously smaller than the North. We don't even need to look at that. Obviously much larger than the Iron Islands. Maybe the size, bigger than the West, smaller than the Reach. Definitely bigger here than the Stormlands. So I think that's a good way to look at it. It was pretty fun to pick up each island and combine them, all the tiny islands, all the big ones. I love doing it. Yeah. Oh, wait, you're muted.
Yeah, that was fun for us to play with. I liked watching what you came up with that. So really, the Summer Isles are quite big. If it was a Westerosi region, it would be the third or fourth biggest region. We don't know how to compare the population figures, but it seems like they're reasonably populous. I mean, Wallana, which we're about to talk about, has 2 notable towns and a city. Westeros itself only has 5 cities on the entire continent. So, anyway, let's move on. Wallano. Here is a quote about the islands right here.
Though Jala is the largest of the Summer Isles, Wallano is the most populous. There can be found Last Lament, with its great harbor, sleepy Lotus Point, and sun-dappled Tall Trees Town, where priestesses in feathered robes carve songs and stories into the trunks of the enormous tower trees that shade the town.
Wallano is the northernmost of the 3 major islands. If you could go straight south from Sunspear, you would hit it on your way. I love the idea that Last Lament has a great harbor, because that leads me to believe that it's where a lot of the swan ships are launched from or are able to dock, because without sufficient anchorage or a deep enough harbor, those big old ships wouldn't be able to get close to shore. You need to be careful with that sort of thing. The kind of things the Summer Islanders would have worked out long in advance, but the kind of thing for us to be aware of, because it's not just as simple as like the Ironborn longships, which have such a shallow draft they can go almost anywhere. Like they can be picked up and carried over land and then dropped in the water again. You definitely can't do that with a swan ship. So we have this place called Last Lament. Besides that, it's great harbor. We don't know a whole lot about it other than that it's the last place, the last population center before you hit the water north, the northern seas. On the southern coast, there's actually more going on. It's more of a population center, apparently. You've got the town of Lotus Port, which is sometimes called Lotus Point in the literature. So I think that one of those might have been a typo before, or maybe they just have multiple names. It doesn't really matter. As we've said, in the real world, places have multiple names all the time, so who cares? It's realistic. There's Tall Trees Town, which was mentioned there in the quote, and that's, of course, very important because it's where their history is carved into the trees. We've got a section on that a little bit later. We even hear during A Feast for Crows that a Corsair king from the Basilisk Isles raided Tall Trees Town. And it's not the first time we hear of Tall Trees Town being raided. It happened during the time of Aegon the Conqueror as well. We'll mention that later. So if you look at the map again, just as a glance to see how far the Summer Isles are from everything else, it's actually not that far from a lot of places. Like Wallano is closer to Sunspear than Sunspear is to Storm's End. And Sunspear and Storm's End have been enemies for forever. Of course, they have a overland connection, which makes it all more sensible. But just to give you an idea, yeah, it's not as far as you might think, given how isolated they were. I mean, it's not that far from Old Town, the Arbor, Starfall. I'm not sure Starfall is taking in a lot of big ships, but still, it's close by. It's still relevant. Lys and Volantis in terms of what's going on Essos. It's reasonable to assume these are all among the most frequent trading partners, but because swan ships sail so far and wide, it certainly goes beyond that too. And this includes places not on our maps. And by our maps, I mean Westerosi maps, because that's what we have. We only have Westerosi maps, and we know for a fact that the Summer Islanders have better maps than the Westerosi maps. It's kind of a little bit of a subtle world-building plot point there, that they know more about the world than the Westerosi do. They've been working on it longer. They care about it more. It's been a more focus of their culture, etc. And they also haven't been spending effort building warships for so long. Nearly every ship they build is a ship designed for exploration and or trade, which, given that for thousands of years, they're going to make more progress on the exploration front. All right. Nearby isles, we have the Isle of Women, which is also called Abulu. It's next to Willano, so it's among the closer places to Westeros. You may recall the Isle of Women from our Nymeria series. There was a whole group of Rhoynar refugees who settled there, originally just a few thousand, originally more than that, now a few thousand, because when Nymeria said, never mind, this isn't going to work, we got to go, some of her people were like, we're going to stay. If all of you leave, we can make this work. We can't make it work with so many of us because it's not fertile here. But if most of you leave, the rest of us can make it work. So that's still the case. So that's an interesting little facet of the Summer Isles is there's a substantial pocket of Rhoynar descendants who have most likely intermingled with the Summer Islanders over the years, because we're talking at least 600 years ago. Between Jala and Willano is the Smiling Sea. That's pretty cool. And in between them is Omburo. Let's go to the far south. We'll come back to the middle one a little bit later, or right afterwards, rather. Jala. It is the biggest of the three, as we said. It's the farthest south, larger than the other two combined, but not in population. Let's not forget, it is the Willano is the smallest, but has the most people, and Jala is the biggest and has the fewest people of the three big ones, anyway. Of course, it has more people than the 47 others. It's also more remote to the rest of the world because it's much farther south. That would put it days, if by sail, if not more, away from all these other places that we said are closer. So if you're a trader, a lot of people, you might have moved to Willano to be closer to a lot of the action, but you can see why some people might want to stay farther back to have access to the more remote markets. Nath might be an exception to a place that's closer to it, but I doubt they have a lot of contact with Nath because of the butterfly disease. They might trade there, but they would know not to stick around, right? So they're remote, right? We're painting a picture of remote but connected by seas, but it's still very civilized and ancient and full of interest. Check this quote out.
Beneath its towering green mountains are vast forests, steaming jungles, beaches of green and black sand, mighty rivers teeming with monstrous crocodiles, and fertile vales.
I'll pass on the monstrous crocodiles, but the rest sounds pretty cool. Fertile vales, yep, that's why they're, living pretty good. They got plenty of fertility, they got fruits and plenty of animals. But beaches of green and black sand, that's interesting. Huh. I, of course, knew black sand was a thing. We've talked way too much about volcanoes in this podcast to not know about black sand. But so what I learned today while making this episode rather, is that black sand isn't always volcanic. Usually is, but isn't always. There's an example, Langkawi in Malaysia, also known as the Jewel of Kedah, is one such beach. This is an interesting place. It used to be a pirate haven. Before that, it was a kingdom where legends said they'd sacrifice a virgin daughter whenever a new king was chosen or when war was declared. Sounds like this place would fit in Planetos pretty well. In the 18th century, some woman there was accused of adultery wrongfully, and she uttered a curse, a 7-generation curse, which sounds like the curse dropped on the royal dynasty of France in the beginning of the Accursed Kings, right? Or supposedly in real life, too. But this curse as well, just like that curse, which seemed to somewhat play out, this one did as well. The Siamese army came in almost immediately after this curse and enslaved the islanders, leading many to credit the curse as the reason for that. Okay, anyway, that is getting a bit far afield, but thought it was an interesting anecdote. But this is kind of cool that this Jewel of Kedah, this Langkawi in Malaysia, was apparently the first part of Southeast Asia to emerge from the depths in the Cambrian era 500 million years ago when the continents were just forming. So that's pretty cool. Let's talk about an original landmass, right? The Caribbean has so many black sand beaches that I can't possibly list them all. That would get boring. But Jamaica, Martinique, the Dominican, Puerto Rico all have black sand beaches, right?
Also Hawaii.
Yes, Hawaii too. That's right. Hawaii also is maybe also has this next one, green sand. That's also a real thing. Green sand. I was like, okay, black sand. I knew that one, but green sand. George made that up, right? Nope, he did not. It forms undersea. It's like a maritime kind of deal, so it can be very fossil rich. It's very popular in gardening because of all the nutrients, and it holds moisture really well. It comes in some kind of random places. New Jersey is a place where it occurs naturally because of the geological formations on the shelf there near the fault line, maybe? Well, not fault line, but near just where the base of the continent forms. Brazil has a lot of it too. Again, I shout out our world building episodes. I learned so much just doing these research on whether these things are real or not. I'm like, I expect it to be fantastical. And I'm like, nope, that's real too. Golden heart trees, however, that's made up, and the amazing bows that are produced from those, we have a whole section on that coming up in a bit. It grows on Jala and on Amboru, but not on Wallano. So that makes golden heart a little rarer that it's in the two farther isles and not the one that's the closest to the trade centers, but ultimately, that's a small difference. We're told that there's vast forests and jungles, and this is the same latitude as Sothoryos, so that really tracks. Thankfully, we don't hear about just endless awful diseases happening in the Summer Isles like we do in Sothoryos, so yeah. There's some river valleys here. There's a Red Flower Vale to the east and Sweet Lotus Vale to the southwest. Red Flower Vale may sound familiar to you because that's the one that Jalabhar Xho was exiled from and wants to get back. Sweet Lotus Vale has the city of Ebonhead near the mouth of the river that Sweet Lotus Vale resides next to. And there's a peninsula there called Golden Head, and north of that is a small group of islands called Lizard Head. So there's also a Stone Head, which we'll mention in a minute. So they have really a lot of things named Head. Ebonhead, Golden Head, Lizard Head, Stone Head. It also kind of looks like each of the three major islands has exactly two large rivers. So Eastern Jala might actually be more remote because it has less fresh water, but, there might be rivers and lakes that are too small for the maps. There's a place called Parrot Bay, south of Jala, and three islands called the Bones. So that's pretty cool. The passage of water, the straits, between Amboru and Jala is called the Indigo Straits. And with that, let's move on to Amboru. Amboru is the central isle, the middle child of the three. We're told today that each of the smaller islands has its own ruler. Each of the 47 islands, at least the ones that have people on them, have a prince, sort of like the Iron Isle system, right? Like each different island has a rock king, or had, not anymore, they don't, but this still is the case in the Summer Isles. They don't have a united ruler. It's rarely have the isles been united for one purpose. We're told later that it's only about a dozen times it's ever happened. So that's pretty neat that you have individual islands or kind of individual principalities, but the exception is Jala, Amboru, and Wallano have multiple princes, and sometimes they have rivalries, presumably over land rights, water rights, the same things that Westerosi lords and ladies fight over for the most part. But here's where we see some of the geographical advantage. There's just less of it. There's less borders to fight over. There's more of these like deep jungles that you don't have a border there. It's like, well, that's just a natural barrier between the two, and no one really is going to live in that anyway, So less disputes over who gets what. Naturally laid out by the way the geography is, and that's just a feature of the place. West of Amboru is the Isle of Love. Isn't that nice? Nearby also are the Singing Stones and a trio of islands, not a couple, called the Three Exiles. So lots of colorful names here, and these are all the kind of things that if there's ever, I'm sure I'll repeat this point later in the episode, that if we ever get like a show or another story or something that deals with the Summer Islands a lot or even features them, a lot of these places will get a lot more development, a lot more backstory, a lot more ideas, more detail. And it'd be kind of fun to, if that ever happens, to think back on this and when it was all just a few lines, plus whatever we can extrapolate, whatever we can read between the lines. That's how I feel like when you set out to adapt, that's what you should be doing. Anyway, other islands. There's the Singing Stones. They're west of the main isles. They have jagged peaks so riddled with holes and airways, it's like it makes a sound. When the wind blows through, it creates noises and sounds musical. The people who live on these isles, because they're not deserted, they are populated, can tell the direction of the wind just by the sound of the song that's blowing. Like it'd be like a musician that knows a particular wind instrument really well. I can tell you where the fingers are placed because I can tell you what notes that is. Similar concept. They wonder whether the gods or men taught the stones to sing. It's a kind of a neat little add-on by the Maester there. Stonehead is the northernmost island in the whole chain. It's plainly the work of men because it's carved. I mean, look at this thing. Shay's going to put it up on screen if she hasn't already. It really looks like some forgotten god glowering out across the sea, it says, and glowering is right. He really is glowering. This is the last visage that Summer Islanders see as they sail north to Westeros. Maybe it's like a warning. It's like, this is what you're going to be seeing up there. Watch out for this.
Shout out to the Unseen Westeros project, which is where I got this piece and the last piece from. They did a lot of the unseen parts of Westeros.
Yeah, or in this case, other places around the world. That's cool. Very cool. I love this. I love this extra art. We don't get this kind of thing in other fandoms very much. I mean, big fandoms we do, like Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, big ones like that. But unless it's a really big fandom, you do not see art of the obscure things, right? If you're seeing art of a really obscure part of this, like we have lots of Summer Islands art. Of course, there's more of the Targaryens and the Starks, obviously, but these are like only big successful fandoms have artwork of the really obscure stuff. Obviously, there's exceptions. There's always exceptions, but you get my point. We get a lot. We're privileged to be in a fandom that is so successful and has so many people just contributing to it just because they want to, because they're inspired to. It's a great thing. Koj is another one. Once home to a man named Malthar the Mapmaker. Koj boasts the finest shipyards in the whole archipelago. And the finest shipyards in the archipelago probably means some of the finest shipyards in the world. If not the finest, right? The swan ships are incredible. And 3/4 of the swan ships are built on Koj. And the Pearl Palace, which is seat of the princes of Koj, is renowned for its collection of charts and maps. This is what I'm saying. The people at the Citadel, the Iron Islanders, they would kill for that information because they know for a fact it's more than what they have. Way more.
Can I cut in here with a note from Dornishtame that I was thinking?
You should.
I was thinking the same thing. A great call, which is why I decided to say Jala like Jala because of Jalabhar Xho, and Koj like Kojja Mo. Dornishtame notes really like that we get those names, characters who may have been named after places. Which I love seeing that like etymology, that through line in George's work every time we notice that. Like for me, the other one that I think of is a Summer Islander, but not Summer Islander root is like Sarella. How like when I noticed her name Sarella was like Nysar, like you could see the Roynish history, I love seeing when George does stuff like that.
And he does it with some regularity. Yeah, he likes to keep that consistency. He's pretty darn good at it. Yeah, good job, George. Yeah, good and great take there, Shea and Dornishtame. Like that. South of Tall Trees Town is a place called the Isle of Birds. And we already have Parrot Bay, so yeah, it just gives you an idea that there's a lot of these birds down there. They thrive in this region. The farthest south of the 50 Isles is called Doku, or Doku. It's Doquu. I don't know how to say that, but that is the farthest south isle. Not the farthest south point we know of, just the farthest south in the Summer Isles. Obviously, the Sothoryos stretches farther south towards whatever else is down there. Exports and imports. Here's a passage from the World of Ice and Fire that gives us a great take on just that.
The islands lacked iron, tin, and other metals, but were rich in gemstones, emeralds, rubies, and sapphires, and pearls of many sorts, spice, nutmeg, cinnamon, pepper, and hardwoods. Bloodwood, ebony, mahogany, purple heart, blue maho, burl, tigerwood, golden heart, Pink ivory and other rare and precious woods were also much in demand, along with palm wine, fruit, and feathers. They sure respect wood there.
They know how to respect wood there. Isn't it strange to hear pink ivory as a wood, but that is a real wood. Most of these are not, like ebony and mahogany are. I don't think purple heart is. Bloodwood, I don't think that is either, although he might just be coming up with a different name for something real. Burl, I've never heard of. Blue Maho, that one's funny, because usually that's the other way around, right? Heck yeah. Badoomch. Anyway, one of the points here is the Isles may lack quite a few things, iron, tin, and other metals, but they have so much other wealth. They can either buy what they need or just live without it. You know, they don't necessarily need all that metal. They can do with it. They can do other things. They have so many amazing woods that they can do similar things with. Japan has some similar upbringing or culture. There's a lot. Japan is amazing with wood. Houses built without nails, just with fittings and fastenings and just little notches and slots. That is what the swan ships are built like. They don't have nails either, so that's pretty neat. Earlier we compared the Isles to the Caribbean a bit, but I think to take that comparison a little further, what we should do is imagine the Caribbean as a place that was never colonized, because that is maybe more accurate. Obviously, the Caribbean today has been heavily colonized, and its own cultural evolution was stunted by outside influence, violent outside influence in a lot of places. So they weren't able to determine their own destiny as a culture, a lot of these nations. Summer Isles, however, they didn't really have a lot of outside influence. There was some, it's not like they were immune to it, but I think that's a vital and valid comparison. What if Africa or the Caribbean wasn't heavily colonized by outside other cultures? If it was enabled to become what it would eventually become on its own, it might look something like this, where they are in charge of their own luxury industries instead of outsiders ruling those things. Like, for example, that's the case in Hawaii. One of the rarest woods in the world comes from Hawaii. It's not endangered, but the locals no longer really control the trade of it. It's all outsiders, people who are not native to Hawaii, that now, over the course of the last 150 years since Hawaii was colonized, has changed. So this is like George's statement, in a sense, on what a culture that was was not denied their own self-determination. So I think that's a good comparison here. It has a lot of real-world merit to consider. One of the ways George did this was by making the Summer Isles more remote. It's harder to colonize or conquer a place that's just so darn far away, you know? There were, like I said, there's some events that bordered on such, but never really took. You might make that case, I think, that this is what George is saying, that this is what would happen if colonialism didn't stick or just never happened in the first place. One of the interesting technological advancements they have there that maybe slid under the radar for most of us, you surely noted the ships and arrows, because that's discussed explicitly at the bows and arrows, or in the ships rather. That's pointed out how the Summer Isles are superior. But what you might not have noticed is that they also have better drinks. And I mean, by that, I mean alcohol. Liquor. They have liquor. That means they have distillation. Westeros doesn't seem to have distillation. They definitely have fermentation. Absolutely, they have fermentation. That's how you have wine. That's how you have hippocras. That's how you have beer, ale, things like that. But to have liquor, you need distillation. Summer Islanders explicitly have rum. A lot of rums. Blackberry rum, spiced rum, black tar rum, which means high end and low end. The kind that just like the lower level sailors would drink in the ports just to get wasted, and the kind that like the nobles would sip in their fancy parties. And we know that it's rare in Westeros because Sam and Gilly have never had it. Okay, well, Gilly never having had it's not weird. She lived beyond the wall where they don't have hardly anything from the rest of the world. But Sam was born at Hornhill. He's a high-born, highfalutin, high society kid. Even though he didn't really belong in that society, he still grew up in it. And so he never tasted rum, which means his father never like had it or imported it. They just didn't care. It just wasn't a thing. It's not on their radar, maybe. So that's pretty interesting. And George had a little joke with it. He gave his own, he threw out one of his own book title style takes from Sam. Sam was like, Gilly said it first. She's like, I like this drink. Sam's like, yeah, me too. It's a drink of dragons. A drink of dragons, the 6th book. It's not going to be The Winds of Winter. It's going to be a drink of dragons, the follow-up to A Dance of Dragons. That's why they were dancing, because they were drunk, right? But, yeah, so that's kind of neat. And he thinks of it as fiery. That's why he thinks of it as a drink of dragons, because of its fiery taste. Liquors are seen elsewhere, in the Free Cities, Karth, but not so much Westeros. Yeah, it's a little under the radar. Food and drink stuff that George kept consistent that 99% of us never noticed. You know who did notice it? Nobody suspects the butterfly. Hat tip to them. That's why we're having this discussion right now, because of a post they put up on Tumblr way back when.
Literally,
Shay is the one who pointed it out to me.
Literally from a decade ago. From
a decade
2015.
Yeah, wild, yeah. Another hugely valuable trade good they have over there that was mentioned, and it's one that most of you will immediately grasp as powerful and potent, is spice. And of course, I don't mean spice like in Dune. But like in the real world, wars have been fought over spice. And they've also been fought over in Westeros, or in Essos rather. There's the many spice wars between the Rhoynar and the Volantines, or the Valyrians. So, I mean, the real life wars that have been fought over trade routes and trade rights to certain spices during the time of when the East India Company was new, and things like that, where Columbus was looking for a passage to India. Like, this was all motivated by spice, by money, by the profits for spice, right? So you got to figure there's some industrial back and forth in the Summer Isles over rights to these things so that they can turn around and sell them on these world markets for massive amounts of money. Yeah. So, yeah, the Summer Islanders are making bank. They got gemstones, they got spices, they got all these rare woods. No wonder they're so rich. No wonder all these people that we see are dressed in really nice cloaks and gemstones, and they look fancy because they're rich. You can see why. Their land, their isles are great. Nina says, this is a great point. I love this thought. She says, because they're so rich, because they're so widespread in trade, they've traded for some cool stuff over the years from cultures that no longer exist. You gotta believe the Summer Islanders have Valyrian stuff that's really rare now because Valyria's gone. Same with like the kingdoms of Sarnor, right? Or Ashai even, or places that used to exist on Sothoryos that don't anymore. Like they might have traded with Zamatar. They might have traded with Yin. They might have traded with who knows where else. They might have traded in ancient Old Town before the Andals came. They might have traded with the free folk before a lot of the prohibitions with trade went into them. You know, there's so many possibilities. You literally might have mammoth fur down there. You might have Valyrian steel there. Why not? Valyrian steel was sold to Westerosi for gold. There's more wealth in this. There's more like exotic trade goods in the Summer Isles than there might be in all of Westeros. That's kind of hard to parse necessarily because of the great size, but I think it might be true. I mean, I don't know. The rich people want obscure, exotic, rare stuff, and the Summer Isles is just farther away, more exotic, has more of these sought-after goods. So what are they trading for? Well, the Summer Isles aren't bringing gemstones to trade for more gemstones. No, they're trading for stuff they can't get. Yeah, Valyrian steel, obsidian, things that aren't available there. They would trade to faraway places so they could have that cool stuff. Those things are still there now. That's great. The Doom wiped all the stuff out there, but the Summer Islands, whatever they traded for, nothing doomed that. Yeah? Yeah, so that's kind of neat. I like to think about it. Great thought by Nina on that one. Let's talk about Golden Heart, because of all the exports, of all the products from there, it's probably the one that pops up the most, given it is a military use product, and A Song of Ice and Fire has so much war in it. Here is Eddard 7, A Game of Thrones, at the tournament. Quote,
100 golden dragons on the Kingslayer. Littlefinger announced loudly as Jaime Lannister entered the lists, riding an elegant blood-bay destrier. The horse wore a blanket of gilded ringmail, and Jaime glittered from head to heel. Even his lance was fashioned from the golden wood of the Summer Isles.
Okay, that is just absurd, Jaime, Mr. Lannisters. These guys are... You know they're wealthy, but this just takes it to another level when you realize the implication here. Lances are made to break. That's the whole point of them, in tournaments anyway, not in real warfare. So he's got a made-to-break fancy-ass rare wood for his lance? What? That's not only expensive as hell... Nina used examples like lighting $100 bills on fire to light your cigars. That's what this is. You're throwing it away. You use it once and it's gone. And it's so expensive. I mean, this would pay for like years of food for a peasant family. Like, you could probably eat for the rest of their lives off of a single golden heart lance. Jalabhar Xho might have given the Lannisters this lance as a gift. You know, he's been trying to get in good with Robert. Later, he tries to get in good with Cersei. So it makes sense that he would cozy up to the wealthiest family in Westeros to try to get an army to invade his country again. So that also turns it around on us. Like, why are the Lannisters doing this? Well, it's because they're that rich, right? They're showing off that this isn't just rich. This is a banned product. Golden Heart is illegal to export from the Summer Isles. But this is eminently believable, right? It's like, well, of course, this richest family in Westeros has access to black market goods. They're just that rich. They're both A, so rich they can afford to buy things that way. B, they're above the law. And who's going to punish them for it? Some Summer Islands, like, export commission's going to sail up and go, you guys are breaking the law and we're going to come after you. What are they? They're going to ignore them, you know? So maybe the example shouldn't just be lighting a cigar with $100 bill. It should be lighting a Cuban cigar in America with $100 bill, because it's an illegal item that you're using wastefully and extravagantly just to throw away. Yeah, it's crazy, right? Let's follow it up with another quote about the Golden Heart bows.
To this day, the bowmen and women of the Summer Isles are esteemed the finest in the world, nor can their bows be matched by common bows, for the princes of the Isles have forbidden the export of Golden Heart wood since the Slavers' Wars. Only bows of dragon bone are known to surpass them, and those are exceedingly rare.
We have some examples of this when we get to the character section of the episode, meaning bows getting used, but they seem rare even then, in part because of this prohibition, right? And the only dragonbone bow we get to see used is Dany's Blood Rider Aggo, right? We're also told the Golden Heart bows and yard-long shafts carried by these archers are never used against their own people. There's a prohibition not only against exporting it, but against using it against other Summer Islanders. You can only use it for warfare outside of the country or against invaders. And this is also a religious thing. It's not just like a law, a regular law that people have to follow. It's a religious law, which when people are religious laws tend to be followed more strictly or more held more tightly, because you're not just upsetting people when you break laws, you're upsetting the gods. That's what people tend to think, which is partly why those laws are made that way in the first place, because it seems a little more effective when people are less likely to break it. So it's not just a luxury good, but it is that. It's a practical item used in warfare, and it's very powerful in that regard. But it's also used as a luxury good, or used in flashy ways by people like the Lannisters. Which is crazy, too, because most people don't even know that's a rare luxury good. So to extend the metaphor one last time, it's like instead of the $100 bill, you're lighting a bill from some other country, and other people don't know how much that is worth. It's like, well, is that $1? Is that $100? I don't know, because I don't recognize that currency. So it's like, this is a rich people move for only other rich people to get. It's like an elite move for only the elite, showing off to other elites only. Regular folk don't know that he blew a 5,000 gold lance. that was just another lance to them. Let's talk flora and fauna. It's a very unique environment, which of course means it has, besides these cool trees and these cool spices and gemstones, there's also some neat other types of biological organisms living there. Quote,
Flowers of 1,000 different sorts bloom in profusion on the summer isles, filling the air with their perfume. The trees are heavy with exotic fruits, and a myriad of brightly colored birds flitter through the skies. From their plumage, the summer islanders make their fabulous feathered cloaks. Beneath the green canopies of the rainforests prowl spotted panthers larger than any lion and packs of lean red wolves. Tribes of monkeys swing through the branches of the trees above. Apes abound as well. The old red men of Amboru, silver pelts in the mountains of Jala, night stalkers on Wallano.
Wallano is the most populous, yet they live amidst these so-called night stalkers. Yikes, that sounds terrifying. Lemurs, though, how cool. I love that they have lemurs. We know that one. That's not actually mentioned in this quote, but we know that from the little Valyrians, the silver-purple lemurs that live in the northern forests of Essos. It's mentioned that these are the only lemurs that live up here. Normally, they're only found in the summer isles and tropical regions. So we know that they exist down there. Not the Valyrian version, but yeah. Of course, we said parrots. We talked about them before. This might be the only place that parrots are native in this world. I'm not really sure. They might also exist in Sothoryos. I neglected to look that one up, but definitely they pop up all over, associated with Summer Islanders. Dany is offered one in Vaes Dothrak. She doesn't take it. They were trendy in Valyria for a while. The Valyrian, that makes sense. Rich people getting like, yeah, I want a talking bird. Yeah, oh, did you see they've got a talking bird? We got to get one too. We can't be left behind. We can't be the only family at the social club without a talking bird. Come on now, right? Maybe the feather cloaks were trendy for a while too. I mean, we're talking thousands of years of Valyrian history, so, you know, a 20-year trend every once a century of the feather cloaks coming back. The feather cloaks are back in, y'all. Get your feather cloak out. I mean, it's a rich people garb in another country. You know, people do that all the time. Sometimes we call that appropriation, but sometimes it just looks cool, you know? Either way, I can definitely believe it, right? Nina says, the old red men are probably orangutans? Yeah, that sounds right to me. Silver pelts, silverback gorillas probably, right? But yeah, she's also lost on what the heck a night stalker is. She says, what are night stalkers? And I wrote, apart from terrifying? I was like, well, that's about all we know, yeah. Maybe they don't stalk people. Maybe they're just nocturnal monkeys that just eat bananas at night.
Yes, it makes me think about Night Monkey and Spider-Man. And night monkeys are a real type of monkey, but these are apes.
Yeah.
So what are night apes?
Night apes. Is that like the one that Visenya had? The ape that was... Did she dress up like the prince? Or was that Rhaegal? Yeah. I do wonder what kind of relationship they have with the primates. Like, culturally speaking, like, are they kept as pets like the Valyrians did? I would assume so. Not the Night Stalkers and old red men or the silver pelts, but the smaller monkeys, maybe. You would assume that since the Valyrians wanted them as pets, that they got the idea from somewhere. As Summer Islanders would have been keeping them as pets to sort of show that off and to, you know, be like, look at this. Don't you want one? Look how cute they are. Don't you want to buy one of these? Maybe they're considered sacred by some people. I don't know. It's an interesting question that they probably don't have just a shrug relationship with these very interesting creatures. Like, they're so fascinating in our world. I would assume that the Summer Islanders, at least some of them, would be curious. Maybe the Night Stalkers are hunted. Maybe they're that dangerous, you know? I keep coming back to the Night Stalkers because they're so cool. Just the name is all we get. They kind of sound like, to me, it's like shadow cats, right? It's just a cool sounding animal. But apparently we have panthers the size of lions there too. So yeah, it is not entirely idyllic. We've said nice things about it, but remember what we're saying is all in comparison to the rest of Planetos, which is the bar is really low for being better in terms of a better place to live. Let's talk ancient history. They are unique in many ways because they were isolated for such a long time in those early days. The peoples of Essos, meanwhile, evolved with overlap to each other. The people of Sarnor grew up influencing and being influenced by the Ibbenese and the Quathai, and of course the Valyrians influenced everyone around them. But in their early days, they were influenced by other people like the Giscari and just the Rhoynar. Just endless examples of this. Whereas the Summer Islanders were very isolated from that and grew up on their own in their own little microcosm. This gives them more basis for much more variety and different origins because of that lack of commerce between other peoples in their formative years as a culture. That's why you see larger and more distinct differences and more homogenization amongst some of the Essosi cultures and Westerosi cultures, because they've been living connected and in the same cities for so long, whereas this place, not so much, right? The talking trees. Let's talk about the talking trees. History can be recorded in many ways. There's a couple other ways that people record history, in the real world that are fascinating. There's runes, there's books. This is sort of a combination of the two, but done with in a way that's very Summer Islander. It's using the tools they have at their disposal. Pretty cool. Quote.
Sun-dappled tall trees town, where priestesses in feathered robes carve songs and stories into the trunks of the enormous tower trees that shade the town. On these talking trees can be read the whole history of the Summer Islanders, together with the commandments of their many gods and the laws by which they live their lives.
The earliest records on the talking trees include their time of isolation, when they didn't know any other cultures existed in the entire world. That's part of why we know that was a thing in the first place, and why that's confirmed and not just like a matter of legend. It's just really cool, though. It's a little reminiscent of the way history is stored in the carved heart trees. You carve a face, and then the tree remembers. This is a lot more literal. There's nothing supernatural about this as far as we know. It's just record keeping on trees, which is neat, but also there are some challenges because trees they don't stick around as long. They aren't as permanent as stone or even other things like bone or metal, especially. Yet this is a real world thing too. These are called arborglyphs or dendroglyphs or silvaglyphs. Aboriginal Australia has a lot of these. The Chatham Islands of New Zealand does as well. And in modern times, it's still a thing. Aspen trees in Colorado, for example, have these kind of carvings on them just by settlers and shepherds who lived, 150 years ago.
Can I give a shout out to an old episode of ours?
You should.
In our old, I think it was our Werewood Tour episode, we had this moment where we were like, well, how do the faces not move up? And it was many people commented on it, like, just use your heads for a second and think about all the times like people carve into a tree and it doesn't grow up, it grows from above, not below. Anyways, oh, you're muted. Yeah, trees don't grow that way, as he said. Exactly. And so it makes me think of that, but it also makes me think that, like, if they start low, like, whether Summer Islanders have to, like, climb up and carve, like, where they stop, where the top is, or if they, like, get higher and put some stories up really tall. I don't know.
I picture it like redwoods, and I know you've seen redwoods in person. A lot of y'all out there maybe haven't, but if you've seen redwoods in person, I'm picturing trees like this, that you can fit, like, you can drive a car through a redwood tree if it's carved out. They're that big. So you can carve quite a bit on a trunk of that size, but you're still making a good point. Like, yeah, would you, like, rappel up a little higher to, like, draw up, or they just have that many trees? You know?
And to be clear, I also want to say, we don't think that this is the same as the golden heart tree, despite us making comparisons to heart trees.
It definitely isn't.
Trees. They're tower trees. Yeah, they're definitely not.
Yeah, because Tall Trees Town is on Willano, and golden heart doesn't even grow on Willano.
Yeah, exactly. So I just wanted to make that point, that even though, like, you might think golden heart tree, that there's a connection there, there's not.
That's a good point there. I didn't think of the heart connection with the word heart. Yeah. But George may have been trying to give the vibe of, well, this is where the history is kept, but otherwise they're not that similar. Yeah. So I think this is a lot. Like the challenges with these is the wood grows over it. Carving into a tree can harm it. Like it allows, like that's like cutting into your skin. You know, it makes the tree more vulnerable to getting sick. But that might be something that they've worked out. They've figured out how to carve into the trees without harming them. And then they maybe just go over. Maybe they just recarve instead of it fading over time. They just, like copying books. You just recarve that spot on the tree so it's, distinct again.
And probably there aren't very many fires there.
It's a jungly, very
right?
moist. Yeah, you're
exactly.
right.
So fire risk wouldn't really be a thing.
Yeah, I think they probably wouldn't have gone with that in the first place if fire risk was so eminent or such a big risk in general. Yeah. So George took this concept, this real world concept of arbor glyphs, and does what he does. He turned it up to 11. He's like, well, what if a whole society has existed like this for a long time and they aren't a society like Aboriginal Australia that's just been colonized and a lot of it's been lost? Well, what if they didn't lose their history? What if it's all still there? What if they not only didn't lose it, but they have facts and knowledge that other cultures want? Like, again, their maps and charts, which aren't on the tall trees. This is history and laws and religion. I'm just saying. This culture has things that other people want. There's also a history compiled by a maester named Gallard who wrote the book Children of Summer, an exhaustive compilation, presumably just taken from the trees. Like it's like the primary source is the trees, and he spent a lot of time there just writing down what he got from the trees and compiling it and presenting it presumably to Westerosi people in a way they can understand.
Kind of say notable the name Children of Summer again, because we're talking about the children of the forest carving into heart trees, and we're thinking of the children of summer. Anyways, I just find it to be a brilliant title.
It calls to mind the similar things, and George is just sort of the way George likes to use language, but that creates a lot of connectivity. I totally agree. Now, we don't know a lot of what's on these trees. There's a lot of information, of course, that we're missing, just like we're missing huge amounts of history from all the cultures of the world of Planetos. But one thing that is explicitly not mentioned, that is mentioned for so many other cultures, is a long night myth. Every culture seems to have one. The Rhoynar have one. The freaking Yitish have one. There's versions from Ashai. Everyone seems to have one just about. I mean, there's a few cultures that are too obscure to have one maybe, but this one isn't that obscure, and yet it isn't mentioned. It's entirely possible that it just didn't affect them very much. They were still able to fish, and they don't rely on agriculture too much. There's a lot of fertility, but it's mostly fruit trees and orchards, things like that. The heat probably, it probably didn't get as cold there. The idea of the others is probably completely foreign to them, other than having heard about it from Westerosi or whatever. So that's pretty interesting, I think.
Can I say there is one story I think they have that isn't a long night story, but has the resonance of the point of the long night stories.
Sure, hit it.
I think the story of Xhondo Dhoru that we're going to get into later has a lot of resonance with that story, because it's all about how she unites the islands under her rule. And so I just find that that's the one story within the Summer Islander mythos, I guess, that is still about hey y'all, we all need to unite in order to stop this.
That is a very
Oh, you're muted.
That's a really good take, because that is an important aspect of the Others invasion is, will humanity stop its quibbling long enough to prevent extinction, right? And so we've talked at length about how the Azor Ahai myth is more about Azor Ahai being a uniter than a warrior, or is more of like a logistician, bringing people together, a diplomat, like a Daenerys bringing together the Dothraki, the Unsullied, the people of Slaver's Bay, plus whoever in Westeros joins her. That's a uniter. Jon bringing together the free folk, Stannis' people, the Night's Watch, some people from the north. That's a uniter as well. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. The example Shea brought up is very rare for the Summer Elves to be brought together, and they did do it at a time of great need. And they were facing an overwhelming enemy who wanted to enslave them all, which is kind of what the others want to do. The others want to kill you and then enslave you. there's an extra step in there, but it's a similar vibe.
Yeah, the great other to the Summer Islanders are enslavers.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good point. Yeah, I mean, that's the worst thing they've ever faced as a culture is mass enslavement. They haven't faced mass extinction by winter, whereas Westeros never really faced mass enslavement. A lot of people moved to Westeros to get away from that. A lot of the Andals fled from Essos to get away from Valyrian enslavement. So, but they ended up on a continent where the others might do that to them instead, but in a different way. Anyway, the talking trees will continue to pop up throughout the episode here and there because we refer to them a few times, and we'll see what happens. Let's move on to the Age of Exploration. Let's start with how they started. Quote,
"As islanders, they took to the seas in the dawn of days, first in oared coracles, then in larger, swifter ships with sails of woven hemp. Yet few ever ventured beyond the sight of their own shores, and those who sailed beyond the horizons did not always return."
Yeah, I mean, that's early exploration for you. People are brave. You do not know what's out there. And some of the people didn't return because they legitimately got lost at sea, but some of them found new land and didn't know how to get back, and that creates just as much risk. It's like, well, if I go back, well, how do I don't know if I can find back, and then how do I get back here again? So the world of ancient navigation was a scary place because you just have very little else to go on. You don't have prior navigators to give you information or help or anything. The Ironborn had a similar beginning, but they didn't start on their isles. They started as first men who migrated to the Isles and then went further. Still, you would still call them a sailing culture, even though that's not the only thing about them. Same is true for the Summer Isles. Their relationship to sailing is very different than the Iron Isles, but they are very much a sailing culture. Sailors don't always represent a culture because sailors are typically a very tiny percentage of that culture. That's less true when you're talking about island people who thrive on sailing. There's a lot larger percentage of the people from the Iron Isles and the Summer Isles that know how to sail or are familiar with sailing, etc. So they are more representative of their culture than, say, I don't know, an American sailor isn't that representative of Americans. That's no more than any random job would be, But if you say an American banker, that might register more with people, right? It's like, oh, American bankers, yeah, there's a lot of them. American insurance salesmen, yeah, lawyers, etc. Sorry if that's what your profession is. I'm not making fun, but those are common professions in America that get talked about a lot. So both of these cultures, the Ironborn and the Summer Isles, had a lot of incentive, a huge amount of incentive to explore their nearby surroundings. What other isles are there? Well, I can see an island over there. It's in the distance. You can actually see it. Sail to that. Well, what's just beyond the horizon? Or, hey, now that we've gotten to this island, we can see another one over there. Island hopping. So they discovered all their own isles. There's no one else down there finding them. Maybe in some far bygone time, they migrated there from somewhere else, but it doesn't seem like. It seems like they just kind of developed there. I don't know. There may have been a long ago Pangea of Planetos, and yeah, who knows? But of course, the day came when their isolation ended. When the day came when they learned that they were not alone in the world. Here's what happened. Quote,
"The first recorded contact between the Summer Isles and the wider world occurred at the height of the old empire of Geese. A Giscari merchant ship made landfall on Willano after being blown off course by a storm, only to flee in terror at the first sight of the local inhabitants, whom the Giscari took for demons, with skins burned black by the fires of hell. Thereafter, Giscari sailors took care to stay well away from the Demon Isle, as they named Willano on their charts. They had no inkling of the existence of Amburu, Jala, or the lesser islands."
Truly, it was the Summer Islanders who had reason to be afraid. Skin color isn't scary. They thought it was, but slavery is scary. That's what the Summer Islanders had to fear from the Giscari. So, yeah, it's oddly, this is an example of like prejudice or racism. I don't know if it's fully racism, but whatever it was a negative thing that worked out really well for the Summer Islanders. Like, yeah, you don't want them here. You want them being afraid of you, because if they're not afraid of you, they're going to come back and enslave you. So that was good. But yeah, the Summer Islanders are the ones who had reason to be afraid. Because the Giscari even today are the biggest slavers in the world, since the Valyrians are gone, because the Valyrians took that title away, but then, yeah, gave it back. But nowadays, the Summer Islanders are difficult. You don't go after them, you don't do slave raids there nearly as often anymore, because they're well prepared for that. That's why it was a daring raid on Tall Trees Town when we hear about that from this Corsair King during A Feast for Crows, because it's not a common occurrence anymore. They're well prepared. The bows, in particular, are what make them so difficult to attack. They can hit you from far away. They're really good with them. A good example of the concept we were discussing earlier about naming, the Giscari called it the Demon Isle. Obviously, the Summer Islanders weren't calling it that. And they didn't even know the Giscari were using that name. Here's a follow-up quote in terms of how it impacted them and what it spurred them to next. Quote,
"This contact had a profound effect upon the Summer Islanders themselves, for it proved that other peoples lived in the lands beyond the waves. Their curiosity and avarice thus awakened, the princes of the Isles began to build larger and stronger ships, capable of carrying sufficient provisions to cross long stretches of ocean whilst withstanding even the fiercest storms at sea. Malthar Zak, a prince of the small island of Koj, was the greatest of these shipbuilders and is remembered today as Malthar the Wind Rider and Malthar the Map Maker."
As we see a lot of times in history, there's a particular individual credited with starting a very long-term trend that pays off even now. As we saw earlier, Koj is where 3/4 of the Swan ships are built to this day, and this Malthar Zak fellow lived thousands of years ago. He lived during the time of the old Empire of Gis. That's like, seriously, 5,000 to 8,000 years ago. Long ago. And this guy is famous. He's an example. He's like an Aegon the Conqueror of his people, but much older. Maybe a Grazdan of Gis, or a Brandon the Builder type figure is more accurate. Maybe even a Garth Greenhand type figure. Less supernatural, or not supernatural at all. Just a very brave, forward-thinking person whose actions had a long-lasting impact on the culture that is still present today. Here's what happened next. It kicked off what they say is a new time, a new era, right here. Quote,
"A new era of exploration and trade began as the great ships struck out across the waters, dispatched by Malthar and his fellow princes. Many did not return. More did. Nath, the Basilisk Isles, the northern coasts of Sothoryos, and the southern coasts of both Westeros and Essos were all visited, and within less than half a century, a thriving trade had grown up between the Summer Isles and the freehold of Valyria."
Mad wealth must have gone back and forth there as these two powerful, wealthy nations discovered each other. Of course, the Summer Isles aren't nearly as powerful militaristically, but they have so much wealth that makes them a big player on the international marketplace, which was barely a thing back then. There was a lot of trade, probably maybe between the Great Empire of the Dawn prior, and when Valyria was at its apex, or at its peak, which was a very long peak, they certainly facilitated lots of trade in all directions, including with Sarnor and Karth and maybe Ashai. Certainly they tried to establish trading posts in the Basilisk Isles. And in the Basilisk Isles and the northern coast of Sothoryos, like they were trying to... The point was all the wealth there, which the Summer Islanders were also extracting. So the Summer Islanders can extract wealth from Sothoryos and then trade it to Valyria, or keep some of it for themselves, however they see fit. This must have been such an interesting time to live in, where every week Malthar and his fellow princes are sending out ships, and every week ships are coming back from voyages that left 6 months to a year ago, and every time they're bringing new information, new history, new lands, new peoples, new goods, new fruit, new spice, new everything. It's just would have been just constant excitement, and what a great time for storytelling, I suppose. If someone wanted to, if ever people were looking for an interesting time in the history of the Summer Isles, their age of exploration would be just really neat to think about. Here's another little quote in terms of specific things that got traded. Yes, this somewhat refers to a quote we had earlier, but it expands on this quote.
The islands lacked iron, tin, and other metals, but were rich in gemstones. Emeralds, rubies, and sapphires, and pearls of many sorts, spice, nutmeg, cinnamon, pepper, and hardwoods. A fashion developed amongst the dragon lords for monkeys, apes, panther cubs, and parrots. Can I just say real quick, the panther cubs is very telling, because you know what happens is that they get big and they don't have those panthers anymore.
Yeah. That's dangerous. Maybe the apes too, because they probably catch the baby apes.
Yeah,
try to train them to be docile,
yeah,
and then they get huge, and who knows?
I hope many a dragon lord was mauled.
You can hope so. And it really figures, doesn't it, that they would just try to make pets out of all the living creatures of the world, and these are slavers, and they think they own everything. So yeah. But I wonder if the sport-loving Valyrians ever had a rally monkey. On the lighter side, right? We can use our imagination to come up with humorous things rather than just imagining how awful the Valyrians were. Mark Mullendor, Westerosi, is seen to have a pet monkey in A Clash of Kings. It has a little suit of chainmail. He loses part of his arm and the monkey in the Battle of the Blackwater. Damn. Poor monkey. I don't care about his arm so much. Mega Tyrell asks Marjorie for help finding him a new monkey because she likes him. And she's like, well, that would make him feel better if she finds him a new monkey. I don't know that she succeeded. We do know that Mark was sent to the dungeons as part of Cersei's accusations against Marjorie, so he was caught up in that. Instead of getting a new monkey, he gets thrown in prison for not doing anything. So that's Cersei for you. Let's talk about gods and worship. Here is a quote to kick us off.
Though a score of gods, both great and small, are honored on the Summer Isles, a special reverence is shown to the god and goddess of love, beauty, and fertility. The union of male and female is sacred to these deities. By joining together in this act of worship, the islanders believe men and women give honor to the gods who made them. Be they rich or poor, male or female, of high birth or low, all Summer Islanders are expected to dwell for a time in the temples of love that dot the islands, sharing their bodies with any who might desire them.
The quote's actually a lot lengthier than that, and it goes on to say how it's expected and respected as worthy of, on the same level as music, sculpture, dance, and other art forms. Now, there's a lot of real world work going on behind the scenes here you could point to that shows that, for example, sex work is only decriminalized in 2 countries, Belgium and New Zealand, but also it's legalized in certain areas like carve-outs, like parts of Nevada, for example. But almost wherever sex work is legalized or permitted, there's a drop in sexual assaults and just violent crime in general. So this is an extension of, we have a culture that has this permissive and open and almost worshipful attitude towards sex, and also doesn't have a lot of warfare. So I think George is connecting these two things, and I think he should, because it is connected in the real world. I mean, war is the number one place where sexual assault happens. Right? It is by far. It's disgusting, but it's true.
Can I say it's kind of an interesting counterpoint to Beyond the Wall?
Oh yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Just because, like, they're permissive, but in a kind of a very different way, and so there is still like sexual assault. But do the women see it as much as sexual assault? I don't know, but it's certainly.
It's like they don't tolerate sexual assault in the beyond the wall. They tolerate it if the man is good enough. Like, it's like if you're good enough at, not the assault part, but at the capturing and the stealing, so there is a level of like, you have to be good enough at what you're doing.
Yeah, we really would have to interview more women beyond the wall to have a better understanding of if they feel, power in that or lacking in power. I don't really know. I don't want to assume one way or the other, and I'm sure it varies. But
like someone like a Gilly would be like, no, but like a Grit's like, well, yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly my point. Someone like a Grit is like, well, yeah, I feel I have all the control I need. Yeah,
it's like, well, yeah, I just kill him in his sleep. Like, what more do you need? And it's like Gilly's like, I wouldn't. If I could do that, I would have killed Craster long ago, It's like, so it's not so simple, but for some women, maybe it does seem that way because they are capable in ways that a Gilly might not be. So this is a really interesting facet of it that touches on a lot of real world stuff that I'm no expert on, but there is a lot of basis here. There's a place in the South Pacific called Mangaya. Yes, Mangaya. It's spelled Mangaya, where there's a strong cultural focus on female sexual pleasure. It is the height of importance. A lot of women are going, wait, where is this island exactly? Yes, Mangaya in the South Pacific. I hadn't heard of it before either, honestly. So it's not exactly popular, but it is a thing. It is a real thing and has existed in other cultures and times and places throughout the world as well. Perhaps the most famous non-modern book on sexuality is the Kama Sutra. Often the butt of jokes in Western culture as a book of sex positions, it is not that. I mean, it does have that, but that is not the point. It has a much more broader, high-minded goal: living well, emotional fulfillment, finding love, finding partners, but also pleasure, but mostly with how pleasure connects and supports and relates to those other concepts like fulfillment, love, and living well. It was written by Vatsyayana, I'm probably saying that wrong, in probably the 2nd or 3rd century, so 17 to 1800 years ago. He was a philosopher with a religious goal in mind for this. Quote,
After reading and considering the works of Bhavravya and other ancient authors, and thinking over the meaning of the rules given by them, this treatise was composed, according to the precepts of the Holy Writ, for the benefit of the world by Vatsyayana while leading the life of a religious student at Benares and wholly engaged in the contemplation of the deity. This work is not to be used merely as an instrument for satisfying our desires. A person acquainted with the true principles of this science, who preserves his dharma, virtue or religious merit, his arta, worldly wealth, and his kama, pleasure or sensual gratification, and who has regard to the customs of the people, is sure to obtain the mastery over his senses. In short, an intelligent and knowing person, attending to dharma and arta, and also to kama, without becoming the slave of his passions, will obtain success in everything that he may do.
So that's the undercurrent there is not pleasure, it's not sex, it's not getting off, it's discipline. That's the underlying anchor between all those things. Sure, those other elements are contained, the pleasure and all the joy and all these other things. But the goal is to obtain mastery over his senses. It's explicitly saying this is not about only gratification. This work is not to be used merely as an instrument for satisfying desires. Master these things rather than becoming a slave to your passion. So he's acknowledging the downside and why this is important to master these things. So why did I bring this up? Why did I have Shea read from the Kama Sutra? Because we don't have direct religious writing on this, what we would call now sex positive culture. That isn't a term that necessarily existed in the past, but the concept is not new. The sex positive as a term is new, relatively speaking. So if we don't have distinct real examples from the Summer Islanders, why not look to the best analog we have in the real world? What does the real world sex positive culture look like? And we can kind of overlap that on the Summer Islands at least a little bit, to get an idea of what they might be thinking. If they're making it high-minded, then we should look at what the high-minded people of the world have done and think about it on those terms. If you were an HBO writer working on adapting more of George's work for screen, and the story called for the Summer Islanders to be involved, I would think that reading about this type of culture, reading the Kama Sutra, reading about philosophical writers who have taken this on and made a career of it, and start there, Now, this is, we can't go too far with this because this isn't necessarily what George had in mind for the Summer Islander religion, but I think it's at least a good starting point. The Westerosi maesters are too ignorant of this for George to get too deep on it too, because they're very sexually ignorant and inexperienced when it comes to their own culture. Westerosi maesters are basically sexless academics, which I don't mean that doesn't denigrate academics. I'm just saying, like, they live their whole life in academia without having relationships. What do they know about sex other than the clinical aspects of it? They don't have it. They're not coming at it from an experiential position. They don't come at it with experience, and they don't understand any of this. This is completely alien. These concepts are like, yeah, they esteem sex and love, and I don't know. It sounds, well, that's what they do. It's, if they really don't get it. And this is a small downside of George presenting us information through in-world characters rather than narrators. But I still vastly prefer it this way. If George wants to expand on these concepts, that's what interviews are for. If he wants to tell us what he was thinking. But in terms of the books like The World of Ice and Fire, it wouldn't make sense for the maesters to really grasp what a sex-positive culture looks like. They wouldn't get it. They don't have that experience. They don't have that basis. Everything is just Westeros to them. And George himself, getting a little bit meta, this is a Roman Catholic man, so that was his upbringing. That's not where he landed, but it's definitely part of who he was. But he basically became a hippie, so a hippie who married another hippie. So he's very well read. He's more, he didn't come from a free love environment of his upbringing, but that's where he sort of trended towards as he got older. So I think he may have had a little extra fun with the Summer Islands because it maybe more reflects how he wants the world to be, whereas Westeros is more what he sees it as. Anyway, I might be reading a little too much into George there, but I think there's some basis there.
I think you're right that he definitely views it positively. It is idyllic. Yeah. It is, I like that he is also sure to point out their flaws when he brings up like the avarice of the princes, they, with all these positive traits, they're still greedy, they still fight, they still kill people, all of these things. So like he has some nuance to it.
Agreed. Now, another aspect of violence and sex is that it's also, I said that the prevalent places that have brothels and sex work have large to modest drop-offs in sexual assaults and regular violence. They also have a drop-off in drug use. Now, George just doesn't have a lot of drug use or drugs in his world at all. There's a lot of drinking. Maybe the Summer Islanders drink less because of that, too. The bar is pretty low there, too, though. Nina adds that there's a certain level of discomfort for her, and certainly this is shared by other people, to the extent to which George has had the culture of the Summer Islands revolve around sex. Because you could have them be sex positive without it being just so central to their culture, right? Westeros, their antagonism towards sex, the violence isn't necessarily upheld as positive. It's just what happens, right? It isn't, their culture doesn't revolve around that. It's just a big thing that people don't like to talk about. So that might be a little, some people could see that as painting with too broad of a brush, or
well, it's a trope.
A trope, sure. The trope is maybe the right word. Yeah, just the oversexed exotic people,
Yeah, exactly. And so, like, you can't divorce this series from the tropes and the world it lives in. Even if you're like, well, within the world, it's celebratory, it's this, it's that, it still exists within our world, right?
Yeah. And Nina says the same thing. She doesn't say George is acting in bad faith here, but there is some of that exotic equals erotic trope happening here. And that's fair. That's fair. I mean, he is working in dangerous territory with that. Not dangerous, but it is a little, it's an area, sexuality and things like that. It gets personal with the readers. Like it's easy. It's an ironic thing that we can more easily detach from people getting their heads cut off, because that's not really a part of our world for most of us. But sexuality is. So yeah, fair points. Good thing we like to be thorough and criticize where it's appropriate, or at least raise the issue of potential criticism.
Well, actually, what I'd like to bring up here too is that he's brought up how he when he thought about if he had made the Valyrians black.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Like this is kind of related to that.
Sure.
Just if
Good
he
point.
had, they wouldn't be the main black culture and the sexualized culture. There would be multiple, right?
That's true. And of course, the reason George didn't do that is just because he thought they'd be dark elves. And he's like, they're just like dark elves. I don't want to do dark elves.
Yeah, he get plenty of criticisms if he had. And you can't say what would have happened if he had done that. But I see why he didn't.
Yeah. It's hard to make realistic-ish races that have, big flaws and big, cultural touchstones and not, make people think of real-world stuff. And occasionally that can hurt some feelings or, whatever. Anyway, let's move on. I think that's a worthy discussion, but I think we've covered it for now. If you're enjoying our discussions today, whether they're world building related or some of our past episodes where we delve more deeply into theories or the supernatural or do big character studies, well, this is what we're here for. This is what we love to do. This is our job. Me and Ashaya do this full time. And, well, the way I do it in the real world with my consumption of podcasts is the ones I listen to the most are the ones I support financially. Simple as that. If I consume 3 hours of this podcast a week and only like a half an hour of this other one, well, I'm a lot more likely to support the one I spend hours a week on. If you are someone that listens to us a lot, maybe consider joining us and supporting us financially on Patreon. It's patreon.com/historywesteros. It's not just a fire and forget. You can treat it that way, but we give a little back to people who sign up. Bonus episodes, the ability to participate in polls like Topic Smoot once a year. And speaking of, we're going to do a mini moot near the end of the year, thanks to the moving of the Seven Kingdoms, Night of the Seven Kingdoms show has been pushed to January, February of 2026. We planned for this year for that show to be happening, so we had carved off like an 8-week block near the end of the year to work on that. That's not happening until next year, early next year, so we're going to come up with some new topics, some new ideas to cover that space instead. That will mean doing a mini moot to add some more topics. So good time to consider joining us on Patreon so you can participate in the choosing of more topics for History of Westeros. Patreon.com/historywesteros. Guilty Undertaker says, sort of like the island of Hawaii is the biggest, but Oahu is the most populous. Good example. Iron Islands is the same. Old Wick is the largest, but it is not the most populous. So that is not an uncommon thing at all. Like, think about Japan. Japan is... there's 160 million Japanese people in the world, roughly, but only like 10% of Japan is livable? What? Right? But that's not, compare like the Sahara Desert, unlivable. There's huge parts of the U.S. that are unlivable. Death Valley, the terrain is not the map, right? People live where people can live. Land is not all equal. All right, let's get into some of the darker subject matter. War and slavery. Pretty much the darkest subject matters there are here. The Summer Islanders are not conquerors. They've never conquered anything other than perhaps from each other. And that isn't perhaps, maybe that isn't even properly called conquest, but whatever. Semantics. Mostly this is because of how far away they live from anybody else. Like, who are they going to conquer and then manage to still govern from such a distance? Like, that would be a very difficult conquest to manage indeed. And there haven't been any real attempts to conquer them either for similar reason. We're like, wow, that would be difficult to pull off. It's so far from our center of government. If Valyria would try to conquer the Summer Islands, I mean, days and days of travel, weeks and weeks by dragonback, weeks by ship just to like communicate. Yeah, it just wouldn't work. It wouldn't work. But also just the whole concept of war and fighting, it's just different in some very fundamental ways on the Summer Islands. Quote,
Wars on the Summer Isles seldom last longer than a day, and do no harm to any but the warriors themselves. No crops are destroyed, no homes are put to the torch, no cities are sacked, no children are harmed, no women are raped, though warrior women oft fight beside their men in the line of battle. Even the defeated princes suffer neither death nor disfigurement, though they must leave their homes and palaces to spend the remainder of their days in exile.
So this is a little piece of connective tissue that you may not have realized. Jalabhar Xho is an ass. He lost, and he has to spend the remainder of his days in exile by their laws, but he's like, no, I'm an election denier. He wants to bring Westerosi knights and armies to somewhere else to get his veil back, which he lost fair and square, at least as far as we can tell. So
yeah,
he's a jerk.
For all we know, there was something that went on that
maybe he was
untoward on the other side. Like, we can't know, but probably the other person fought valiantly and won.
Yeah, and even if he'd lost unfairly, he would be bringing death and destruction to a lot of innocents just to, because he didn't get what he wanted, right?
Yeah, absolutely. He probably wouldn't follow these tenets with those Westerosi knights because he wouldn't actually be able to control them, and they would rape and loot and destroy.
Yes. So this is the type of what he's willing to inflict on his people because he's not Prince of Red Flower Vale. Now, to Ashaya's point, yeah, knights in the Westerosi, they would do the things that they do. They would rape and kill and murder. But this line reads to me like Oberyn in the TV show where he's like, we don't harm little girls in Dorne. And Cersei's like, oh, please. It's like one of those times like, yeah, Cersei's right on that one. Like,
I'm positive. You're right.
Yeah, there's some women, there's no way that the Maesters are exaggerating. This is the idyllic thing this isn't George saying that. This is the Maesters saying that and not realizing that, no, that's not believable. They're not that good of people. No humans are that good, right, as a whole. So, yeah, I don't think I'm being too cynical. I think these Maesters aren't being realistic enough. But maybe I'm wrong.
Also, I'm just kind of curious, how far do they actually have to go to be in exile? Like, definitionally, like, does a prince have to go to the next island over? Just the next Vale over? Leave the palace?
All the way to Westeros?
The Summer Isles completely? Yeah.
Depending on how badly they lost or how much they were hated. He was really hated, so he had to go all the way to the Red Keep. From the Red Flower Vale to the Red Keep. Yeah, he just likes the red places. So there's also a underlying difference in just the societal structure here that I think is similar to the Scandinavian systems, which is that they had kings and queens and princes and princesses, but they didn't really have the nobility. They didn't really have the feudal system because their geography just didn't support it. We have an episode that was chosen in Topics Moot that we're going to do later this year called Norse Myth and the Long Night. So I've been learning a lot about some of these old Scandinavian countries in medieval and proto-medieval times and around this era. Which is that, yeah, they didn't really have the feudal system there because their society couldn't support it just logistically. You can't make an estate farming all this territory to support all these slaves or serfs or peasants or whatever the appropriate term is for whichever place we're talking about, where you have a household knights and all these other things supported by this estate. The Scandinavia just doesn't support that. The land isn't fertile enough. There isn't enough, only 2% of Norway can be farmed. It's just a tiny amount. So where are you supposed to support these armies and people? So the feudal system isn't supported, not because they didn't want it. It just doesn't work. You need to have these levels of, I send my food to you and you give that food to your troops and they pass their troops up to the king when the king calls for them. This system can't exist in couldn't exist in old Scandinavia because there wasn't enough food to go around, and I suspect it's similar in the Summer Isles. Maybe not for the same reason, maybe not because there isn't enough food to go around, but just because, for whatever reason, maybe other reasons, they just didn't have this feudal system, which leads to entangling violence. And you don't have anyone to say, hey, I call up the troops. What troops? You don't have the troops to call up, you don't even, let alone not having standing armies, you don't even have vassals to call on. So this is a fundamentally different system, which I think we sort of take for granted, that that such things exist, especially as I'm pointing to a Scandinavian system, which is European. You think even in Europe, this wasn't ubiquitous, although it was common. This wasn't, though. This lack of feudal system was the exception. The rule was mostly feudal system. So yeah, and these are principalities, right? These aren't kingdoms, so they're a little designated a little bit differently. They're a little more similar to Dorne in that way, although Dorne was united under one prince, and prior to that there were just lords, and they were kings at one point. So anyway, that's somewhat just semantics, the difference between principality and kingdoms, but it is different enough to point out. Now, the Valyrians, of course, were very interested in all those exotic goods we discussed, but that's not all they were interested in. It's the Valyrians being Valyrian. Quote,
"The Valyrians offered gold for slaves as well. Then, as now, the Summer Islanders were a handsome people, tall, strong, graceful, and quick to learn. These qualities drew pirates and slavers from Valyria, the Basilisk Isles, and Old Geese. Much woe ensued as these raiders descended on peaceful villages to carry their inhabitants into bondage. For a time, the princes of the Isles abetted this trade by selling captured foes and rivals to the slavers. The histories carved into the talking trees tell us that these years of shame endured for the better part of 2 centuries, until a warrior woman named Xhondo Dhoru, princess of Sweet Lotus Vale, who had herself been enslaved for a time, united all the islands under her rule and made an end to it."
The years of shame. It seems like the shameful part is the collaboration with the slavers. That makes sense. It's the most shameful thing in here, like helping slavers enslave your own people. That's about as bad as it gets, right? I mean, the Valyrians are a whole nother culture. They've been doing this for all along. You don't write the history of the Valyrians. If you write the history of the Valyrians, you say, yeah, they're evil, but it's not the Summer Islanders. It's not their shame to bear that the Valyrians were slavers. It's only their shame to bear that they helped. And whether this is the reason or not, it did seem to stick. It's like, yeah, slavery bad. That was enshrined. We tried this. It was bad for our culture. It turned us against each other. Luckily, Xhondo Dhoru emerged and led her people the right way, and that stuck. So this was a temporary, historically speaking, because it lasted over 200 years. It was very long. But in terms of thousands of years of Summer Isle history, it is a little bit more of a blip when you're looking at it that way. Sure. Most of the time, they've been opposed to this. Most of the time, they only entertained the idea as a nation once the richest amongst them were newly introduced to the concept, and the greater population pushed back against it clearly. It might be worse if you consider what kind of slaves the Valyrians would most value. Like, the Valyrians are obviously, they want sex slaves and on top of everything else, and they know that the Summer Islanders put this religious importance on sex and be good at it. So they would really exploit that. It's pretty awful. It's a good reason to really push back. So this was a huge amount of cultural impetus to adapt. Their people were being enslaved, and if they didn't fight back, it's just like any bully. If you don't push back against bullies, they come harder. They're like, look how weak they are. Let's go double. Let's go triple. Let's go quadruple. So if you don't stop the slavers, more slavery will happen. They'll start establishing outposts on your country and start pulling, rather than the Summer Islander middlemen selling their own people, the Valyrians would come directly to the source. And then it gets harder and harder to stop the whole process. And that's what happened. They just said, hey, we're going to fight back. Let's find a way to do that. And it was weapons of war, unlike they had ever used before. And because they developed these weapons to fight invaders, well, that helped them keep it that way. Like, we only built these weapons to fight invaders. Let's not use them on each other is kind of the idea here in this quote.
Before I read the quote, shout out to the image I just had on, which is a still of a gift set I made on Tumblr about a decade ago now of Xhondo Dhoru. And quote, "As iron was scarce and costly in the Isles, Armor was little known, and the long thrusting spears and short stabbing spears traditional amongst the Summer Islanders had proved of little worth against the steel swords and axes of the slavers. So Xhondo Dhoru armed her sailors with tall bows of golden heart, a wood found only on Jala and on Boru. These great bows far outranged the recurved bows of horn and sinew the slavers carried, and could throw a yard-long shaft hard enough to pierce through mail and boiled leather, and even good steel plate.
You might think of people like the Mexica, who were often called the Aztecs, or maybe a different South American culture that lacked metalworking, but still found a great substitute for war. In their case, obsidian. They made wooden planks ridged with obsidian that would be extremely sharp. There's no native alternative on the Summer Isles, though. We don't have obsidian there. These are not volcanic islands, as best as we can tell. But they did have this, and they found it, and they used it. They figured out what it was best for, and they made the most of it. It's the world's best wood, other than dragon bone, which is not wood. And they make the world's best bows, which probably means they have the world's best bow makers, too, or at least tied for the best with, I don't even know who. And we've said a few times in this episode, they've only been united under a single ruler about a half a dozen times in their entire many thousands of years of history. This was one of them. Actually, sorry, let me say that again. Only about a half a dozen times since these wars. So there would have been a few times before that. But this was one of the main times it happened, and perhaps the most important time it happened, because it was to push back foreign invaders. All those other times it may have happened under a single leader. We don't know anything about those times, but I doubt it was to push back foreign invasion, because I don't think they've faced that many times. Like, what other invaders would there have been? So bows as well. This is just thinking about the way bows work and just their function. They're good for hunting. They can be offensive weapons, but they're better for defense. They're better for holding a fixed position. When someone else is having to come at you and you get to just shoot at them, that's the ideal position to be in a bow, to be shooting at. So attacking a castle with bows is a lot harder to do, or a fort, than the people inside the fort shooting back. So yeah, so you can see why this culture is ripe with defensive weaponry, which is why they would be less likely to go attacking each other, because they're all very good at defense and not as good at offense. So the development of these bows was huge for them. It completely changed their trajectory as a culture, because it meant the Valyrians were like, all right, well, the Valyrians are all about profit. The whole slavery engine is about profit and greed, right? It's about wealth. So if by developing golden heart bows, by getting good at using them, they made enslaving Summer Islanders unprofitable. The Valyrians like, you know what? Going there, we get shot at so much, it just isn't worth it. There's plenty of other people to go enslave out there in the world. And so they basically said, hey, we have more value with our woods and our gems and our spices than we do with our slaves. So come back and trade with us like normal people, and let's forget about all this slavery business. And that's pretty much what happened, I think. It seems to be that's what happened, but it didn't just happen overnight. But this incursion of warfare died away. It didn't seem to flare up again, and trade started to really take off. So that's pretty good. Like, that was a good outcome given this awful beginning. And it's an interesting how it happened on economic terms. Again, the Summer Islanders just made slavery unprofitable, at least in their corner of the world, while making other industries very, very profitable. It's like, don't come here and attack us. We've got these great luxury goods to sell you. If you come here and attack us, then all the trade falls apart. You know, everybody loses. So the the Valyrian elite are not stupid. There are a lot of negative things, but they're not stupid, and they could see that. That's a very obvious connection. It's like, okay, well, we can make more money from these people by trading with them than by attacking them. But part of the development of this, part of what made trade between these nations really happen, was the next innovation, which may have been the most important for their entire society. More important than the bows, or at least as important, the swan ships. And this development of the swan ships was part of the same push by Xhondo Dhoru during the slavery wars. Quote,
to give her archers a solid platform from which to draw and loose, Xhondo Dhoru built ships larger than any previously seen in the summer sea. Tall, graceful ships cunningly fit together without so much as a single nail, many walled with rare hardwoods of the Isles, made harder still with magics, so the rams of slaver ships cracked and splintered against their sides. As swift as they were strong, her ships oft sported tall, curved prows carved into the shapes of birds and beasts. These swan necks won them the sobriquet of swan ships.
I just love that picture. Something very satisfying about the idea of slavers going ramming speed, and then they ram the side of the ship, and their ram breaks, and their ship is the thing. It's just like it gets destroyed. And it's like they're just like the summer. I was just shaking their heads, like, "Yep, I love when they do that." I love those, and they're just shooting down on them. It's like even when they stick, and they're like trying to climb over the railings, like that railing is like 20 feet above. How do I get over there to board that ship? And they're just like shooting down on you, and it's like, this was a bad idea, y'all. So. And the mention of magic, it's the only mention of magic in all of the Summer Islanders lore that we've looked up. And I wonder if it really is magic. This is the Maesters, just like, is the technology they don't understand. Like, might not be any magic involved at all, but there might be. And that would even make it even more hilarious when the slavers try to ram them. And it's like, hee, we've got magic wood. That's going to work so poorly, you suckers. They're really big, too. Not just tall, but just long. They're just massive ships, way bigger than anything built in Westeros. Maybe not bigger than Westerosi warships, but I'm not clear on that. Anyway, they're way bigger than any like trade ship, any non-war vessel, and maybe even bigger than the war vessels. When Sam is embarrassed after sleeping with Gilly, and he's like, "Oh my God, what have I done? I broke my vows." He goes off and hides from her because the ship is so big that he can avoid her. It's a big enough place that he can be like, go over here. She won't know where I am. He thinks how if they were still on the Blackbird, which is the Night's Watch ship that carries them around, he's like, I wouldn't be able to do this there. She would find me in a second because it's just so much smaller. Yeah, pretty cool. So to me, these ships stand out even more than the purple ships of Braavos, which kind of, to me, are like the second most outstanding in terms of how they look and how that would really stand out in a harbor or whatever. But they're far more impressive in their sailing range. There's really nothing like them in the world as far as we know. So not only can they explore in places few others could even dream of, they're able to take routes other ships can't. These are true ocean-going vessels. Long ships can't do that without a lot of risk. Only like the Ibonese have a similar level of technology for ocean-going vessels. Maybe some of the other people, but I don't think so. They pretty much, all the other races, cultures pretty much have to hug the coasts, or at least stay in sight of the coasts. But the Summer Islanders can cut across large bodies of water or avoid really dangerous areas like the Stepstones. If you're trying to cross into the narrow sea from the south, you have to pass. You have to go through the Stepstones. And, well, that's dangerous. But if you're a swan ship, not only are you more prepared to fight piracy, but you have other options in terms of what route to take.
Can I say it was really interesting? I rewatched the histories and lore about the Summer Sea. From that's the Game of Thrones histories and lores of the extras they did, and the one about the Summer Sea is narrated by Euron Greyjoy, so it's Euron's perspective on it, and he talks about the Summer Islanders and how they're hardly really worth attacking because they're such fierce warriors. It's hard to win against them. You're more likely to lose, and then when you get into their hold, they're just holding, like, they have a bunch of stuff that the Iron Islanders don't really prize as much. Like, there's better targets that have better loot. But what he says is the reason that he would target them and other Ironborn would want to target them is for their women. It's a really good, like, if they manage to get a woman, they're like trained in lovemaking, yada yada. He goes into that, and then after that he goes into talking about the Ibonese and how they're also really good fighters, all these things. He's like, the two people that, like, you don't really want to mess with.
Makes sense. Take it from a pirate. Like, which pirates don't target those guys. They're tough customers. Yeah. Alyssa Farman's Sun Chaser, the famous ship, one of the most famous ships ever built in the world, was designed based on the design of a swan ship. It was like actual even larger than a swan ship. Arya sees swan ships coming in and out of the harbor sometimes at Braavos, and she loves seeing them. She enjoys watching them. She just thinks they're really graceful, which that's what they are. That's the way they're designed.
And Arya knows graceful.
Arya does know graceful. They're kind of like their own little water dancer, aren't they? So this put them in places like Braavos. Speaking of Braavos, because the Summer Islanders were among the many people enslaved on that ship that escaped to form the hidden city. Too bad they didn't just head for the Summer Isles. I wonder if the people on there were like, "Yo, let's not make a new city. Let's go to the Summer Isles." Might not have worked out though. Like Nymeria and Abulu, it might have been the same problem with the Summer Islanders. Princes might have been like, "We don't want to upset the Valyrians, so we're gonna kind of semi-compromise here." So, again, Valyria never actually invaded the Summer Isles. They may have thought about it, but the way events transpired, it just didn't seem profitable for them. But clearly the Summer Isles would have been worried, or some people there would have been worried that could happen, that could come to pass. Like, what if the Valyria comes for us? We can't beat dragons. I mean, any culture is going to realize they can't beat dragons. But even if they don't invade, you don't want a situation where it's like Valyria has decided to burn all swan ships on sight with their dragons. You don't want that. No one wants that, right? Trade would be better for both of them. The Dragon Lords would have the advantage, but they don't want to go up against those archers, right? That's bad for them. Like, you could pick off a Dragon Lord on the back of a dragon with that, with those huge range, twice as long as regular bows. That takes a whole different strategy. Again, that's like Euron being like, you'd just rather fight somebody else. Let's just take on a different target. Remember the Rhoynar, when Volantis and the Rhoynar went to war, and when Valyria got involved, there were lots of dragons, and some of those dragons got shot down by Rhoynish archers. If the Rhoynish archers can shoot down dragons, I feel like the Summer Islanders probably could as well. And speaking of challenges, managing Valyria, let's talk about Sothoryos, because that's a place that they might have handled better than anybody else. Lots of different cultures tried to extract wealth from Sothoryos. None seem to have succeeded overwhelmingly well, but there's some evidence that the Summer Islanders might have succeeded more than anyone else. Sothoryos is a place we love to think about, a place we'd love to know more about. It's just full of mystery and wonder and danger. And again, yeah, maybe the Summer Islanders do know more about it than anyone else. Quote,
"There are certain indications that explorers from Koj may well have mapped the western coasts of Sothoryos to the very bottom of world and discovered strange lands and stranger peoples far to the south or across the endless waters of the Sunset Sea. But the truth of these tales is known only to the princes of the Isles and the captains who serve them."
It absolutely holds up to scrutiny. It's close by. They're expert seamen. They share a latitude with it, so the climate should be at least more manageable to them than it is to Westerosi or Giscari or Valyrians. They might even have prior experience with some of the diseases. Maybe they have resistance or immunity to some of them. At the very least, melanated skin is protection against the sun more so than light skin. Of course, the Rhoynar were dark skinned too, and it didn't work out for them, but it wasn't because of that. It was because of the diseases and the untold horrors. Another passage in the World of Ice and Fire suggests that the Summer Islands have charted the whole West Coast, or a lot of the West Coast, but don't share that knowledge like a lot of the secrets they have, a lot of their trade secrets. Literally trade secrets. Of course they don't. Why would they share that? They wouldn't even necessarily share it with each other. Trade routes in the real world, before the whole world was mapped really well, but back in the day before it was, those were highly guarded secrets. Highly guarded. I mean, again, we come back to Columbus. He was trying to find another route to India. Yeah. Here's a name we'd be remiss not to mention, the famous explorer. Quote,
"Lomas Longstrider, who visited the Summer Isles in his search for wonders, recorded that the sages of the Isles claimed that their ancestors once reached the western shores of Sothoryos and founded cities there, only to have them overwhelmed and destroyed by the same forces that wiped out later Giscari and Valyrian settlements on that perilous continent. The Citadel's archives hold a few ancient chronicles of Valyria, but none speak of these supposed cities, and there are maesters who cast doubts on the truth of these claims.
If these settlements were far south enough along that western coast, it's not at all hard to see how they escaped the knowledge of Valyria and or the Giscari, who mostly cared about the northern coast and the Basilisk Isles. We don't hear about the Giscari or Valyrians going over to the west coast at all. So I don't know why they would be so aware of the Summer Islanders, especially if we know the Summer Islanders would have incentive to keep this on the down low. What is the source of this maesterly doubt? Just because these obscure Valyrian chronicles don't mention something they might not even know about? Maybe they didn't have cities. That part I can get behind. They probably didn't have cities in Sothoryos, but they would have trading outposts, small towns. I would believe that. Again, coming back to Alyssa Farman and her sun chaser, that incredible tale included 2 ships escorting her, captained by Hightower brothers. Those 2 ships didn't make the full voyage. One of them was taken down by maybe a kraken. The other just found itself on the western coast of Sothoryos after getting lost. They thought they were going to try to find the Summer Islands, ended up in Sothoryos, but they did meet some Summer Islanders. Here's what Sir Eustace Hightower, captain of that ship, said.
We all would have perished, I think, but some Summer Islanders passing by came on us. They know that hell better than they let on, I think. With their help, I was able to get Lady Meredith to Tall Trees Town, and from there to home.
That was pretty gross of them. The Summer Islanders just came by and came on them. It's just some Summer Islanders passing by came on us.
Yeah, they came on us, yeah.
Yeah, it's all this disease and everything, and these guys are doing that to us? That's awful. No, it's... sorry, that was gross, y'all. It's horrible. Hey, we're talking about awful diseases. I'm just trying to make something slightly less gross than dying of brown leg or red, whatever these weird diseases whose names I can't recall. Red
Powderfoot.
spots, yeah. So... as horrible as this experience was, the starvation and the diseases, I can almost laugh at how much money these Summer Islanders probably got paid for this. They probably know this route really well. They're like, you want us to take you to the Summer Islands? Yeah, we know where that is. That's where we're from. We sail back and forth all the time. It's just straight west. I mean, we take you on this difficult journey that is very hard to navigate. Only we know the way. They got paid a lot. You're like, wait, you're willing to pay how much? For us to just guide you to a place we know really well? Sign me up, In Westeros, we've heard the expression sweet summer child. They don't have that phrase on the Summer Islands, I bet. They probably have something like bitter winter child or bitter winter adult. That's what these Hightowers were. You bitter winter adults. You naive little... Yeah, pay us all your Hightower money and we'll take you to port. Cyclops is better than Wolverine sends a super chat and says, would love to see the North and Islanders interacting. Yeah, that would be so cool. Culture clash.
Yeah, it makes me think of that quote referencing Jane Poole earlier, where she was afraid, and that was a northern person interacting with a Summer Islander, kind of.
Well, Cyclops is better than Wolverine. Stay tuned because we do have the Night's Watch interacting with the Summer Islanders on the Cinnamon Wind very soon in this episode, and it's great. So we've got close to that anyway.
And I have a response to your username. Jean is better than Cyclops and Wolverine.
Since the conquest. Of course, the Summer Islanders would take note of the conquest. It may have created more trade opportunities because the kingdom would be at peace more often. And they would have more unified trade structures and export fees and all these other things. Laws would be more unified. Might just make things simpler. Their own dating system wouldn't account for this, of course, because, they would, it's just they're not using the conquest as a timeline indicator for themselves, but it would matter. And here's a reference to something that happened early on after Aegon's conquest. Quote,
And in the 19th year after the conquest, word reached Westeros of a daring raid in the Summer Isles, where a pirate fleet had sacked Tall Tree's town and carried off 1,000 women and children as slaves, along with a fortune in plunder.
A pirate fleet, not a ship. So that might be what it takes these days, because I think a single pirate ship or two would not have much success. They're just way too well defended, way too prepared. But they weren't prepared for this. This is not an invasion because they didn't stay, but they brought perhaps enough manpower to do something along those lines, like to carry off 1,000 women and children. Not just the sheer logistics of that, let alone the horror of it all. But this news is what got Aegon to build walls around King's Landing. I don't know if Tall Tree's town took the hint and built walls, but maybe. They certainly have great wood for it, so, that might be a good idea. There's a mention of Alysanne, as in good Queen Alysanne, going to the Citadel and getting lost in the library. Not like literally, like, where am I? But getting lost amongst the books because the books were so interesting to her. And it's mentioned, like, she emerged only to attend lectures on the Valyrian Dragon Wars, Leechcraft, and the gods of the Summer Isles. What's her interest in the gods of the Summer Isles? It's like the gods of the Summer Isles are all about love and sex. Is that what she was trying to? Like, I'm gonna see what I can learn some things for the bedroom. We only got 9 children. I want to have 13. And that's what she ended up with, right? So, but can you imagine if she really got lost in the library? They're like, oh, sorry, Jaehaerys, we lost her in there. She's just in this. We can't find her. She's somewhere in the library. At least she's happy, right? The Sea Snake took his ship Summer Maid, named appropriately enough, to the Summer Isles. We don't know what he did there, but I'm sure he probably had a good time and probably made some money. Had some nice drinks, drank some of their rum maybe, and swapped some trade goods, It probably worked out great for him. We also have this quote from the wedding of Aegon and Jaehaera at the end of the Dance of the Dragons right here.
Even from across the narrow sea they came, from Braavos and Pentos, all 3 of the daughters, old Volantis. From the Summer Isles appeared 3 tall black princes in feathered cloaks, whose splendor was a wonder to behold.
At the time of the Dance of the Dragons, this would be a big deal. I mean, well, what did we just say before about war messing up trade? So the end of the dance would be huge because it means trade is opening back up again. The Summer Islanders want to be there for that. They want to be negotiating because new trade deals would be happening. Things would have to be started over. That means new deals, rearrangements, things that were dropped and destroyed now have to be fixed and picked up. And that might mean a change in the pecking order. That might mean a change in who gets the deals. So these Summer Islanders representatives, these princes, are almost certainly thinking along those lines. They're like, let's show up, be at the wedding, and then get to business, right? Start this all over again. Let's start re-importing Goldenheart. You want palm wine? You want that fruit? You want monkeys? You want some feathered cloaks? War's over. Time to get back to your luxury goods. So they're in the elite wealthy club. They're invited to events like this. They belong there because they have similar status in their homeland and they have things that Westerosi want and vice versa. And the whims of kings and queens can have a huge impact on them because they get their wealth through these trade arrangements. Another great example is Aegon IV's mistress, the Black Pearl, Bellegere Otherys. Bellegere, I don't know how to say that. Bellegere. Like Richard Gere. Bellegere. Who was probably far more interesting than him outside of his children, because the great bastards are very interesting. Now, she was half Summer Islander through her mother, who was a princess. So this was no ordinary Summer Island. This isn't like we were talking before about how when we see the Cinnamon Wind, it's a bunch of, mostly regular folk. Bellegere Otherys was a princess on one side and a son of the Sea Lord of Braavos on the other. So she's very, highborn. And this is a very more cultural overlap here, that a Summer Islander could excel in the courtesan culture of Braavos. Comes in there very well equipped, very well experienced, and with some skills and knowledge that people elsewhere might not have. She was also, though, a pirate, smuggler, trader, and captain of a ship called the Widow Wind. She had many lovers apart from Aegon, so, very free-spirited person. Saw him off and on for 10 years, mostly during the reign of Baelor the Blessed. And then, of course, he became king not long after Baelor's death, so she wouldn't have been around as much, and I don't know if she wanted to visit him there. She might have been afraid of him making her stay or something like that. I'd be worried about that. But the Black Pearl tradition continues now. There's another Black Pearl that in Arya's time that Arya sees and encounters. So that's pretty cool. I don't think the current one is a descendant of the Summer Islands, but I forget. I didn't look that up. In one case, a Summer Islander did get embroiled and did help bring war to the Seven Kingdoms. Zobar Kukua, a.k.a. the Ebon Prince. He was one of the Band of Nine, alongside Maelys the Monstrous. There's a scene where Jaime, who's very young in his memories when he's thinking about this, was completely disinterested in Lysa Tully because, they were trying to get them to talk, and he was ignoring her because he was more interested in Brynden Blackfish and asking Brynden questions about Maelys the Monstrous and the Ebon Prince. He wanted to know all about those guys who Brynden had fought against because Brynden was in the War of Nine Penny Kings. It was Brendan's first war. That brings us to the characters. Let's talk about some specific characters. This is basically our final section of what's proving to be a pretty lengthy episode. But hey, there's a lot to say about the Summer Isles, and we don't want to leave things out. So with these characters, this is kind of why I saved it for last, even though they're probably the most interesting thing, is that we get to see all these things we've discussed, the culture and the customs and the traditions and the behavior and the upbringing, all these things play out in scenes within the story. Of course, as we said, Jalabhar Xho is the first one we see who's got a name, the first one we see interacting with people and doing things. He doesn't actually speak common when we first meet him, but later in the story, he seems to have learned some, which, well, that makes sense because a couple years go by. Tyrion, for example, sees him talking to Sansa at the Purple Wedding about Summer Islander wedding customs. She's and Tyrion thinks how good Sansa is at being social. He's like, she's really good at this, And there's also Summer Islander dancers at the Purple Wedding. They had quite a story to tell. They was like, we went dance at this wedding and the king was murdered. What? Yeah, he just dropped dead. Of sudden, he dumped wine on this short guy's head and then it went off. It was crazy, right? And Jalabhar Xho is still giving expensive things away. Remember, he gave that lance apparently to Jaime and maybe other stuff. Maybe that's not where Jaime got it, but that's my best guess. He gifts a golden heart bow to Joffrey. That's a nice gift, right? As we've seen. I doubt Joffrey appreciated it fully, but that's a nice gift. Jalabhar, of course, pops up a lot of times. He apparently petitioned Robert every year for several years for Red Flower Vale. Robert loves the idea, but Robert loves a lot of ideas. I mean, hot weather, women who are experienced at sex, of course Robert loves that, but it never happened. So once Robert's gone, Jalabhar just starts petitioning Cersei for it instead, and Cersei thinks, she thinks very ruthlessly and evilly about it. She's like, I'm going to say no, but next time he asks, or I'm going to say next year, but next time he asks, I'm going to say no. But actually what happens is she arrests him because he hangs out with Marjorie a lot. Because of course he's hanging out with Marjorie a lot. There's another rich family that might be able to give him what he wants. And Marjorie's about to be queen. Well, some people think that. Marjorie is apparently about to be queen. I'm not sure she'll get there, but you can see why this man is cozying up to her because he's like, well, this is a potential queen that can get me Red Flower Vale. He did perform well at the Hands Tourney in the archery event. He came in, I think, tied for second or third. It couldn't beat Anguy the Archer, but he did as well as anybody else other than Balon Swan. Makes sense. Good at archery, right? Fits. He rode in the procession that became the riot. So he was there in that scene and he escaped with his life along with other people. And he accompanies Tyrion when Tyrion goes to meet the Dornish wedding party that's arriving on the road that he expects to be Prince Doran. It turns out to be Oberyn. Yeah, he brings Jalabhar with him to make the party look a little fuller. So yeah, unfortunately for Jalabhar, he was arrested by Cersei during the plot against Marjorie and is currently in Qyburn's care. So bad luck, Jalabhar, but he kind of seems like he might be a kind of a jerk anyway, so maybe I don't feel too bad for him. Nobody deserves Qyburn, but some people deserve it less than others. Let's talk about the Cinnamon Wind. Maybe my favorite Summer Islander scene of the whole books, because again, we actually get to see the Summer Islanders doing Summer Islander things as regular people, as the majority in the scene. It's a ship so excellent, George had it appear twice. The Cinnamon Wind first appears in A Clash of Kings, and then it appears in A Feast for Crows. The first is really big, even though it's a relatively small role, but it's a huge change for Dany because of what it does for her. The second is more important for this episode because it gives us a better look at their culture. What's neat about this is that sailing is a very common profession, so it just makes sense that the Summer Islanders would be the one to connect these dots, which is that Dany finds out about Robert's death in Karth because of a Summer Islander named Xhondo who heard about the dragons and wanted to see them. He goes to see the dragons and he's like, hey, I'll give you some news while I'm at it. I can give you this I want to give you let me see the dragons and I want to do something for you. And let me give you this important, valuable news. And they're like, what? Robert's dead? That is big news. Thank you. This sailing scene with Sam and Gilly, though, might be why the Maesters and the rest of the world look at the Summer Islanders as strong, which maybe isn't a cultural thing. It might just be because of an outsized portion of people encountered are sailors. And sailing is a lot of work and it will make you strong, as we see through Sam's point of view. Sam works his ass off, almost literally, to partly pay for their passage to get to Old Town all the way from Braavos, and it is hard work. And yeah, that'll make you strong. So if that's your job, then you're going to be strong. And if most of the Summer Islanders that people meet around the world are sailors, well, then most of them are going to be strong. Anyway, just a little observation there. So there's like plenty of Lyseni in the books, but do we get a majority Lyseni scene where Lyseni are doing Lyseni thing? No. The Dothraki, we get a little of that, but even that, it's kind of limited. We get it through Dany's eyes. Things through Dany's eyes are just different because they all treat her so differently. They're all in awe of her, except for before, in the first book when she's just called Drogo's Khaleesi, and they treat her differently because of that. So, she's never... Everything through Dany's eyes about the Dothraki is a little bit filtered because they all see her as, this supernatural figure, the mother of dragons, the woman that brought them... Yeah, it's just different than Sam, who's a little more of a regular guy, even though, he's a noble, but his personality, his bearing, he doesn't come off as in charge or authoritative or a guy who brought dragons back to the world, right? So, yeah. Arya does see quite a bit of people doing regular people stuff in Braavos. It's another reason we love Braavos so much. But Braavos is such a melting pot, it's already so culturally diverse that it's, you can see Braavosi doing Braavosi things, but Braavos is a product of the rest of the world, and more so than other places, where the Summer Islands is so unique and so exceptional because of its unique origins and isolated origins. Volantis and Selhorys, these are places we see through Tyrion with Jorah. They see the Red Temple, that speech that Benero gives, and we hear them talk about festivals and holidays, but we don't really see it firsthand. This isn't a Volantine cultural experience. This is the Red Temple. This is a R'hllorist cultural experience that could happen in any of the cities that R'hllor is present. Now, we've never been to the Summer Isles. I kind of doubt we will in A Song of Ice and Fire, but it's not that out of the question for it to be an ending point for somebody to move there, to go, hey, you know what? I'm out of here. Westeros sucks. Let me finish my days in the Summer Islands. It could be like a montage style thing for some characters decide to go to live there. But let's talk about what happens on the Cinnamon Wind, because it's still our best example. And they do something that we see a lot of. Funerals. There's a lot of funerals in A Song of Ice and Fire, but this is one of the few that isn't Westerosi. Right? We technically have a few others that are sort of funeral, but even the other ones like Dany doing the pyre for Drogo, that's not really a Dothraki funeral, So it's pretty unique. Let's talk about Quhuru Mo. He wears a green and yellow feathered cape. I love keeping track of the feathered capes. There's so many different options here. You got all the different colors are possible. So I said it wrong. Quhuru Mo is the one who wanted to see the dragons. It wasn't Xhondo. I got them mixed up there. He wanted to see the dragons. He told Dany about Robert. Anyway, Xhondo is Kojja's lover and is the crew member that gives Sam all his day-to-day tasks. And Xhondo saves Sam. Xhondo is the one who's at the brothel where Sam loses his temper with Darian and punches him in the face, ends up in the canal. Xhondo jumps in after him, rescues him, tells him, "Hey man, it was funny when you punched that guy, but you owe me a new cloak. My cloak is ruined, and from saving your life." And he's like, "Okay." And this is a good way for like a subtle literary clue that this is a good guy, because he's like, "I like when you punched that bad guy," and he's like, "I'm on your side." And Sam is one of the ultimate good guys of the series, like the most like wholesome good people. And Xhondo immediately likes him, and he's not like after anything. He's just like, you owe me for the cloak, but like I'm not. Other than that, I don't have any designs on you. And this is huge because Xhondo heard about the dragons through Quhuru, who is the captain. Xhondo is like a first mate or something like that. And when he sees Sam, he's like, I heard you, not only did I like it when you punched that guy, I heard you talking about the dragons. I've seen the dragons. And they're like, what? He's like, yeah, I was in Karth. I met Daenerys, and that is huge. This is, again, connective tissue between Targaryens. Aemon hears this, and he's like, princess that was promised. It's not the prince, it's the princess. He's so energized by this. He's like, it all makes sense now. All this thing, I've been thinking about this for decades, and all because this Summer Islander comes along and gives him this missing clue that's so vital. But of course, Maester Aemon's energy level can't be maintained. He's too old. He gets sick again, and he dies on the way from Braavos to Old Town, right? Sam gives a speech about Aemon. He gives his funeral speech, and Xhondo is the first one to respond. Quote,
"The air was moist and warm and dead calm, and the cinnamon wind was adrift upon a deep blue sea far beyond the sight of land. Black Sam said good words," Xhondo said. "Now we drink his life." He shouted something in the summer tongue, and a cask of spiced rum was rolled up onto the afterdeck and breached, so those on watch might down a cup in the memory of the old blind dragon. The crew had known him only a short while, but Summer Islanders revered the elderly and celebrated their dead.
The extra tidbit that they revere the elderly it fits so well into the pastiche of revering life and revering the experiences that any elderly person would have had. That's a person that has a lot to tell you about. They have lived a long life. That is valuable. That should be celebrated. And of course, it follows that you celebrate the dead rather than mourn. You would look at it positively. That person had a good, full life. This person lived to be 102. You can't ask for more than that. That's a win. That's not a loss when they die at 102. That is a victory. That person lived a long time. We should celebrate that. So I respect this. I appreciate that. There's lots of cultures around the world that look at funerals, try to make funerals a happy event, a celebration rather than a mourning. And this is in the interplay here. Sam is sad. He's crying. He misses Maester Aemon, and that's real. That's human. But he's presented with an opposite view. He's never seen this before. He is one of the characters we've seen at a funeral scene before at the Night's Watch. The Night's Watch funeral scene when they give like the man who dies at Craster's, and they give a speech for him. And like, where did he come from? Down White Harbor Way. And it's it's solemn, it's nice, it's dutiful, but there's no real emotion in it. They're not sad or happy. It's just like, they just do it, right? It's a thing to be done, and this is so different than the way the Summer Islanders are. Like, they're colorful and joyous and outspoken and positive, and the Night's Watch are quiet and dutiful and sullen, and it's very much the meta here is George is mashing these two very opposite things together in a place where they can't escape each other. They're on a ship. They have to interact. These two cultures must clash, right? There's no culture that is more restrictive, more negative towards sex, and less colorful than the Night's Watch, right? They're all in black. They have no color. They're against color. Mance Rayder put a little bit of red in his cloak, and they were like, no, you're going way too red. Are you kidding me? This is absolutely not. Shea had a great catch right before this episode. In this quote, Xhondo, a black man, calls Sam, a white man, Black Sam because of his clothes. It must look really weird to a Summer Islander. They are dressed in their feather cloaks, their bright colors. Like, why would you wear all black? That is boring as hell. Like, what are you trying to sneak in? Are you a criminal? Are you trying to sneak in somewhere? Like, are you a night stalker? Are you trying to look like a night stalker? Is that what's up here? Yeah, like compare this to, again, other examples. The Hoster Tully boat funeral scene, which does have a little bit of comic relief because of Edmure being a bad bow shot, which that wouldn't be a problem if the Summer Islanders needed archery at their funerals.
Well, it has comic
no
relief, but it's not a celebration.
No, you're right. Yeah. It's comic relief in a very sad moment. Like, this is to make it less sad because it's so sad. It's like, you don't need that here. They're drinking and happy and partying. You don't need Sam is the exception. He's sad and everybody else is happy. So yeah, it doesn't come off like a sad scene. It's great. Compare that to the Targaryen burnings or whatever. Like, these are all very different. Xhondo's lover, as we said, is Kojja Mo. Kojja is also one of our cats. We have a cat named Kojja. We call her Kojja Mew. That's her full name. Kojja is the daughter of the captain, Quhuru Mo, and she is herself the captain of the archers on the ship. And as Ashaya pointed out earlier, the name, or Dornish Dame did, I suppose.
We both did.
You both did. You all did, yeah. Kojja might mean born on the island of Koj. It might be what that means, or at least associated with it somehow.
And they're extra, ship maker, extra, not, it makes sense.
It really does. And so not only do Summer Islanders celebrate life and drink and stuff during funerals, they specifically make a point to go have sex after funerals or as part of a celebration, because that is the ultimate, like, spitting in the face of death, is to celebrate life, maybe even make a new life, right? But Sam and Gilly, they hook up after the funeral, and he feels guilty. Kojja takes care of their baby Aemon Battleborn, so that they can hook up. So that's why she's like, I'm going to take care of the baby so you can go hook up. She's like, if I weren't taking care of your baby right now, I'd be hooking up with Quhuru right now. I mean, Quhuru, that's her father. Oops, this isn't Targaryens. With Xhondo right now. So this is Kojja's shutdown of Sam and being like, look, man, you're looking at it the wrong way. After saying, no, you honored the gods that made you both. When you hooked up, that was honoring the gods. This is a gift from them. This is what she says. Quote, I love this.
All you Westerosi make a shame of loving. There is no shame in loving. If your septons say there is, your 7 gods must be demons. In the Isles, we know better. Our gods gave us legs to run with, noses to smell with, hands to touch and feel. What mad, cruel god would give a man eyes and tell him he must forever keep them shut and never look at all the beauty in the world? Only a monster god, a demon of the darkness.
Like the blind god, right? We do have that in Westeros. Like that one, there's one. But that one does sound kind of bad. So yeah, her point is made, right? What mad cool, that one. Of course, the Night's Watch are celibate in order to fight the demons of the darkness. But is that really necessary? Many ignore it anyway. Like Jeor Mormont basically says as much as himself. Like, yeah, we don't actually care. We can't make it an institutional okay, but like lots of men go to Molestown and I'm not going to do anything about it. My predecessor didn't do anything about it. I doubt many Lord Commanders will do anything about it, and they shouldn't. So again, the meta here is really strong. George clearly made the Summer Islanders extremely sex positive in order to be a foil to the Night's Watch vows, and then to, again, jam them together here and have this great scene. It's not random, right? It isn't just George made a sex positive culture and then left it at that. No, the rest of the details around this culture all fit that. They're all in line. They all make sense. You can see how things come, how one follows the other. And it's also, again, a statement on how these really isolated cultures can have very different outcomes in their cultural development. And I love that this is who Aemon dies amidst, right? These are the people most in opposition to not just how the way a Night's Watchman lives, but how the Maesters live. Aemon is the guy who gave the love versus duty speech. And here Sam receives a very different, near polar, again, solar opposite, love versus duty speech from Kojja. That's basically what that was. He's basically saying, your duty is to love. Gilly needs you. Don't be one of those men that just like gets all weird after sleeping with somebody. Be with her. Celebrate. Be joyous. Don't be weird. Don't be awkward. Enjoy it. Your culture is giving you the wrong ideas here. It is summer versus winter. These are very much opposites conceptually, but also the dictates of geography, right? The Summer Islanders are who they are in part because they've never faced the others or winters that will kill you. It's not the only reason, but if those things existed in their culture, you could be sure that things would be different in some ways. In addition to the rich cultural world building and the cultural clash of the scenes on the Cinnamon Wind, it all just fits together so expertly. George is at his best here. It's also, we get some just regular demonstration of how the swan ships are so successful. Not one, but two attempts are made on them while they're sailing. We do get 2 chapters of sailing, so yeah, it makes sense. The first one isn't something we see, we just hear about it after the fact. Sam is just thinking about it. He's like, I'm impressed. Those Golden Heart bows, he's like, I was trying to fire one, and I don't think my arrows got far enough, but Kojja and her crew killed like a dozen Stepstone pirates when one ship or a couple ships came at them, and then they gave up. And he keeps working at it, and then they get another attempt. When the Cinnamon Wind is close to Old Town, they see evidence of Euron's piracy. They don't know it's Euron. We do. And some Ironborn emerge to challenge them. Ignorantly. Quote.
Thrice longships were sighted by the Crow's Nest. 2 were well astern, however, and the Cinnamon Wind soon outdistanced them. The third appeared near sunset to cut them off from Whispering Sound. When they saw her oars rising and falling, lashing the copper waters white, Kojja Mo sent her archers to the castles with their great bows of golden heart that could send a shaft farther and truer than even Dornish yew. She waited till the longship came within 200 yards before she gave the command to loose. Sam loosed with them, and this time he thought his arrow reached the ship. 1 volley was all it took. The longship veered south in search of tamer prey.
There's also another bit of meta here that Sam is becoming more of a man, more of a whole person in this little bit of time that he spent with the Summer Islanders than he did in his entire life on the wall, let alone living with his family, who were even worse. Because this is where he learned to really love, and this is where he learned to, like, work. Like, all that time on the wall, all that work in there, he didn't get in this good a shape. He was never this good with a bow. Remember, he was like a joke with the bow when he was being taught by them. But here he learns how to do it because they're really good at it, and they probably weren't laughing at him in between. They did probably better at like teaching him with confidence without mocking, right? So a lot going on here. Sam, his upbringing, just like 2 chapters on the Cinnamon Wind, did more for his upbringing than all his life with his parents and all his time in the Night's Watch. That's huge. This is a big part of what George is doing here. So Euron's men, right, they're very emboldened by what's happening there. His leadership is giving them a lot of confidence. A more experienced Ironborn captain wouldn't have even tried this, right? They know swan ships. Like, this isn't news to them. The swan ships have been around for centuries, if not thousands of years. The Ironborn have been dealing with the Summer Isles for thousands of years. They know better. So this might have been some guy who was just like, all right, I'm excited. I'm going to try something that isn't usually done. Or a guy that just didn't know better because he's, some rookie captain promoted under Euron's new authority here. And so like a green guy, he's like, oh, never mind. Bullies will be bullies, right? That's what happened here. As soon as one volley was all it took. And they're like, never mind. We'll find somebody that doesn't have 400-yard arrows or arrows that can fly 400 yards. So it's in between these two pirate attacks, the one in the Stepstones and Euron. Oh, well, it's not Euron, but Euron's men. That's when Maester Aemon passes. And of course, they can't do a fiery burial. They can't do a funeral pyre on a ship. But they do this cask corpse compromise where Aemon's body is stuffed in the cask of rum. April Tyndall says, they drank Aemon. His body was in the barrel they were drinking from. They don't say drink to life. They drank his life literally. I'm not sure that's what happened. They definitely put his body in the rum.
In the blackberry rum, they do put it in the rum. I always thought he drank it.
I'm not sure they put the body. I think they rolled the body out. They celebrated his life. I think they put the body in after that. Not before, but it is more fun to think that they actually drank. It reminds us of the time where Dolorous Ed said he drank. He's like, you drank the wine that your brother died in? He's like, well, it was good wine. Like, I don't want to waste it. You know, it's the same thing. This is good rum. You know. Black Balaq. He is the commander of the 1,000 strong archer corps in the Golden Company. 1,000 out of 10,000. So they have a full 10th of their army is archers, but only 50 of those 1,000 are Summer Islanders wielding Golden Heart bows, which goes to show it's rare, but also like he's the leader. Like it figures that a guy from an archery society would rise to the top of a merit-based company where, yeah, the guys who were the best rise to the top. Not only is he probably among the best actual archers, he has a Golden Heart bow himself, which means he's also one of the best equipped. As far as Summer Islanders looking colorful as a standard, which is what we've come to expect, Black Balaq is far more so, because he combines the somewhat standard splendor of a Summer Islander with the quote-unquote rude splendor of the Golden Company, which is that sellswords carry much of their wealth on their person, because where else are they going to put it, right? It shows off how successful they are, and it keeps it safe. Like they have the golden arm rings, one for each year in the company. Black Balaq is his beard is whitened. So he's older. He's at least in his 40s. Probably got a lot of golden arm rings to go with his feathered cloak and his whatever other gems and rings and wealth he's carrying on his body. This is a very, very shiny, blinged out guy, but also not a man to mess with. High officer. He's among the inner circle. We see him meeting with 8 other officers, like the top of the Golden Company. He's a good example of how the Golden Company used to be a Westerosi thing, but over time they've evolved, and even the officers are not all Westerosi anymore. And he's not even the only one. There's Gorys Adorian and Lyson Omar, who are Volantene and Lyseni, respectively. Of course, all the captain generals of the Golden Company to date have still all been Westerosi, but that may not stick either over time. So this is a man we'll see again. We already saw him in action at Griffin's Roost. Helped shooting some dudes off the wall. There wasn't much of a defense mounted, but the archers did their job. The Maester tried to send ravens off to warn, and, well, Black Balaq and his men took those ravens down too. So they really did their job quite well, and we'll probably see that again. Maybe in some battles, certainly to come. Tal Toraq kind of rhymes a little bit with Black Balaq. When Dany frees the slaves in Meereen, she forms a sellsword company out of freed slaves, guys who want to be in this company. The first leader is a man named Milano Yos Daub, who is described as more of a scribe than a warrior, but still a competent and formidable guy. But he dies of the pale mare. And he's replaced by Tal Toraq, who is a Summer Islander. And he's seen giving advice at the War Council when they're under siege. He and his men, the stalwart shields, gather at the East Gate when Barristan is getting ready to do his charge in the Winds of Winter. We don't actually hear what happens with them because the charge happens in Barristan's second T-Willow chapter, but he's out in the field. He doesn't know what's happening on the other side of the battlefield, so presumably they're doing something. We'll find out more later. Chataya and Alayaya. Chataya is an extremely graceful and disciplined businesswoman. She's the very picture of the upscale madam. She has a feathered gown, too. Not a cloak, but a gown. So, yeah, I guess that's the feminine version of the feathered cloak, maybe is the gown, or maybe the women wear cloaks, too. I don't know. Women wear cloaks, so no reason why she couldn't have that also. But it goes to show that there are other garments that they use these bright-colored feathers on. She owns one of the most high-end brothels in King's Landing on the Street of Silk. Recall that early on, Bronn is, like, not even allowed in. Like, nah, you're too low end for this place. But he becomes a knight and a hero of the Blackwater. Next thing you know, he's in bed with two of the women from there. And yeah, you have to be rich to even go in, let alone afford it. Now, sex work is something we could expect the Summer Islanders to have a big leg up on, given all the cultural attitudes towards it. And perhaps skill is a big part of it as well. But a foreign-born operator is going to face challenges from the culture she resides in. Their views towards sex are going to be the predominant view, not hers. So it gives her perspective on both of these worlds, really. And she thinks sex is a gift from the gods, and she was raised to believe that. But Westerosi don't. But they sure are willing to pay for it, and there's a lot of bank for her. Speaking of willing to pay, it's Chataya's brothel that Tyrion pays huge amounts to pretend to sleep with Alayaya, who is Chataya's daughter, so he can take the secret passage to instead see Shay. Now, of course, this secret tunnel's been there since maybe the time of Tywin. Tywin is the most popular theory for who built that tunnel. And he may even be the father of, Murray or Dancy, one of the two girls there. Certainly not Alayaya. But so Cersei finds out about this, part of it, and thinks to threaten Alayaya, thinking he's threatening Tyrion's lover. Tyrion is still very upset by this and threatens to do to Tommen whatever is done to her, which actually restrains Cersei. But Tywin finds out and is very, very disappointed in this whole thing and has Alayaya whipped anyway. She still doesn't snitch or anything, and heals up. Her back is permanently scarred, but she goes back to work. She was born in King's Landing, so we don't know if she's ever even been to the Summer Isles. Likely her mother raised her with some Summer Islander values, but if she wasn't raised there, that would certainly be, there'd be a lot of Westeros in her as well, in terms of her upbringing. We don't know who her father was. He's not mentioned at all. But she looks like her mother, so yeah. Anyway, Anguy won the Hands Tournament Archery. He was, he beat out Jalabhar Xho and Balon Swan. Won a ton of money there and blew most of it at Chataya's, including with Alayaya. Bronn, like I said, also paid for Alayaya, and so did Oberyn Martell. She's just a very popular choice. Robert, of course, loved the place, which means, yeah, he had bastards there. This is where Cersei targeted his bastard Barra. And that was an ugly scene. Chataya was grateful to Tyrion when he had Al-Ardim killed and had Slint sent to the wall, because those were the two people who came in and did the dirty work. And that wasn't good. So, yeah, Littlefinger himself, of course, is a major brothel owner, the biggest brothel owner in King's Landing probably, actually compliments Chataya's and says, she runs a fine establishment over there. I thought about buying it. What a twist that would be. Littlefinger owning the brothel with the secret tunnel that leads near the Red Keep? Whoa. Can't have him owning that, can we? I'm not sure the tunnel even matters anymore. Nina and I were discussing this one. Like, the Tower of the Hand was burned down. So, but the tunnel didn't lead directly into the tower. It led to a stable right next to it. So the stable might have been destroyed too, but maybe not. So it might be a dead end now, that tunnel, but it might not be. So it's kind of an open question. Quote of the week, our somewhat new feature where I bring you some of my favorite quotes from other books and give you an opportunity to perhaps pick this story up yourself. Here's the quote. There is time enough to be lost in the majesty, and to remember nature did not provide this with her careless hand. My race of mortals carved this paradise from irradiated rock and violent gas by channeling the greatest virtues of all men in common cause. A patriotic pride that I did not know I possessed fills me. The same blood flows through my veins as the man who sent the last of the Lovelock engines and storm gods here. But this zeal evaporates as soon as I realize I do not belong to the age of giants who made this, but to a smaller, meaner age where men think war the height of human endeavor. I laugh at the cosmic joke. Only humanity could grasp the stars and then let them slip through its fingers for the pettiness in its heart. But I feel hope. That pettiness defined my grandmother's age. It may yet not define ours. That is from Dark Age, Book 4 of Red Rising by Pierce Brown. Red Rising is my favorite series since The Expanse. And it's got one more book before being complete. That should be out next year, according to Pierce Brown. He's under 40, a hungry young author. It's his first series. And so I think it won't be delayed a long time like some of these other novels in their final books, or series in their final books. So this is book 4, so it's a while to get to that. I hope you're inspired by this quote. I'll probably throw a few more quotes from this series here and there over the coming months because I love it so much. But yeah, Dark Age, Red Rising. And if you want to get involved, get book 1, you can get it through our website, historywesteros.com, either through Audible format on Audible, through Amazon, or just buy the book regular and read it analog style. A few other characters that I think are worth mentioning, people with Summer Islander heritage. Brown Ben Plum. He claims to have amongst the many ethnicities in his background. Summer Islander is one of them. Tyrion notes that when they're attacked by stone men at the Bridge of Dream, one of the ones that almost gets young Griff was a Summer Islander. There are Summer Islanders in the Brave Companions. Unsure how many. Probably, maybe none now, since the Brave Companions isn't really a functional unit anymore. We see one fighting at Daznak's pit. He fights Kraz, loses, because, of course, Kraz is later killed by Barristan outside of the pit. Sarella Sand and her mother. Of course, Sarella is presented as Alleras in the Feast for Crows prologue. She's the 4th daughter of Oberyn. Her mother is the captain of a ship called the Feathered Kiss, which is presumably a swan ship. Safe guess, right? Let's not forget how close Old Town is, as we discussed earlier, relatively speaking, to Wallano. Decent chance that's where Alleras' mother is from, Sarella's mother, from Wallano, but she could be from Koj or Jala or Umburu, anywhere. And in the opening chapter of A Feast for Crows in Pate's prologue, Alleras is seen shooting arrows at apples with a golden heart bow. She puts it away in its nice case afterwards, and they kind of admire it for a minute, and Pate's thinks about how hard it is to draw and how Alleras must be stronger than she looks, because bows, it's hard to do that, but Alleras was probably drawing a bow since a very young age, given her mother, and you got to believe that any merchant Summer Islander is going to have skill with a bow, or at least basic training in one, because
Can I say something?
It's everything. Yeah.
I think the answer to how you should refer to Sarella is to use gender-neutral pronouns to say they. Because you're constantly referring to man and woman. I think that's what should be a good rule of thumb.
Yeah, you're right. Because she's in disguise as a man, and that's how she's
They're in disguise.
They're in disguise as a man, yeah. True. Yeah, you're right. That makes good sense. That's true. And that's it. That is our final character to mention. As I've said a few times, maybe we'll see someone flee or retire there. The Cinnamon Wind, though, could absolutely be heard from again. When Marwyn decides he's leaving, almost immediately after meeting Sam, he says this, quote, "What will you do?"
Asked Alleras the Sphinx. "Get myself to Slaver's Bay, in Aemon's place. The swan ship that delivered Slayer should serve my needs well enough. The gray sheep will send their man on a galley, I don't doubt. With fair winds, I should reach her first."
But do they want to go? I mean, he can't just be like, yo, take me to Slaver's Bay. Like, they have to want to go there. They have to, can he pay for it? I don't know that they want to go there. It's a war zone, even if he pays. They've seen Dany once. I mean, they have other things to do. They're not just at Marwyn's beck and call, obviously. So, He may have to find another way to get there, and I'm not convinced that the Cinnamon Wind is the guaranteed to be the option. It could be, though, which is why we have to consider it. But Marwyn doesn't appear in Quaith's vision as one of the people coming to her, to Dany. It's Kraken and Dark Flame, Sun and Griffin. There's no Marwyn. There's no Bulldog Maester, chained bulldog, or whatever you would call him. I don't know what you would call him. He kind of looks like a bulldog is what the point being. But either way, he's not in there. So that doesn't necessarily, doesn't mean she won't encounter Marwyn or the Cinnamon Wind, but maybe not based on this quote. One final thought I have here. The Sea Snake show is a strong possibility for us to explore more of the world. Any show involving the Summer Isles has that potential as well. It can reveal more of the world than most perspectives. Like any show featuring either Corlys Velaryon or the Summer Islanders or both is going to be a show that has a lot of exploration and a lot of places to go. Why not have Corlys have Summer Islanders on his crew? Men with great experience in places he hasn't even been to. Makes a lot of sense to have people with that experience amongst your people. Yeah, if you want experienced seamen, get the most experienced people in the world. Makes sense, right? I would love for the Sea Snake show to have that. We've talked about this. We've used this comparison before, to have like a Star Trek The Next Generation vibe where they just go from place to place and getting in adventures and exploring these cultures. And yeah, the crew of this ship as well, though. You could have a diverse crew on the Sea Snake, the ship, because that's also the name of the ship, where you've got Westerosi, Summer Islanders, Volantines, Lyseni. You would have a lot of, a melting pot. That could just be really cool. A variety of stories, a variety of backgrounds, just lots of options for different stories. At first, when Corlys on the TV show on House of Dragon was black, we wondered if that was maybe a Summer Islands heritage thing. They never really explored that, which is fine. Maybe they will eventually, but they might one day, especially if they do the show, they may get into that.
I think technically they said something out of world that it precludes that being the case, but I still think that's my headcanon, and I would prefer that, and I don't think that some offhand comment from a writer or whatever necessarily has to mean that this show should be hamstrung by that. You know what I mean? So I really like the idea that the Velaryons, who are seafaring people, married into another seafaring people. Yeah, you're muted.
It makes so much sense. They're wealthy. There'd be trade back and forth between the cultures. Yeah, I mean, and the Velaryons were the naval leaders of the Targaryen vassals or whatever. Yeah, it's a connection that makes some sense. So it's possible, but definitely not established.
Yeah, I guess that's my point, is that we're saying it not just because Corlys is black, but because he is a seafarer and his family is as well.
Yeah, absolutely. They flipped Xaro Zoandaxis. Actually wrote Xaro Zoandavos in the document here. And speaking of seafarers, but yeah, he was Carthene in the books. They made him a Summer Islander in the show. They also identified Grey Worm as from the Summer Islands. In the books, we don't know where Grey Worm is from. His background is specifically not unidentified. And George even said, I haven't had a reason to come up with a backstory for him yet, but maybe one day I will. So it shouldn't need to be said, though, that Planetos has a wide variety of skin tones. We shouldn't just be thinking black must mean from the Summer Isles. But it's a possibility whenever you see that. If we don't have an explicit name, if we don't know where they're from, it's a valid guess. But it's a guess, not an automatic, because there's more possibilities. Sir Tony Sled says, Summer Isles would be a nice place to hide people. Like Dany and Viserys, that would have been an interesting place for them to hide rather than in Essos. Yeah, I mean, the few white people in the Summer Islands might stand out, but to who? Only to other Summer Islands. What are they going to do, sail north and tell everyone? Yeah.
Yeah, you would have to have betrayal from within for that, but what an AU. I just really like that alternate universe idea of Dany raised down there with
that would have been cool.
Summer Islander marriage. I don't know, it's just interesting.
Yeah, it just totally makes sense. Yeah, it is well, they stand out with their silver hair, but they do that anywhere. Their silver hair and their purple eyes. I mean, there's plenty of silver-haired, purple-eyed people in Essos. Maybe that was the thinking to vanish amongst them, but they didn't.
Yeah, they didn't actually hide them, really. So
no, yeah. They weren't in a group of other Valyrian-looking people. They were by themselves with Allerios, yeah. Guilty Undertaker says African kingdoms did some of the same things when colonialism was happening. They would sell their enemies to European slavery as well, or to Arab slavery. Yeah, so this is a real world thing. Getting rid of your getting rid of enemies who share your own cultural heritage in a really gross way by selling them to foreign slavers. But it's happened, yeah. It isn't just an American thing, that's for sure. Slavery's old and old and old. It gets more and more stories that just terrifying. Lady Bela says, regarding Sam and archery, especially as archery is on the Tarly sigil, so having him get good at that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's true. Having him getting into his huntsman background, his huntsman ancestry. Right, great catch. Very good, very good.
Response from Cyclops is better than Wolverine said, well, Emma Frost is better than Jean and Scott. My response to them was Madeline Pryor is better than them all, and they agreed. So
all right.
There's our X-Men chat for y'all. I cosplayed Maddie Pryor and Jean.
Very well, I might add.
Yeah.
That's a good compromise right there. See? Everyone gets along. Scattered Minds from the Scattered Minds show says, loving this topic as a Black fan. This is diversity done well. Real and natural, not forced. George R. Martin is a genius. Cool. Glad to hear from you. Thanks, Scattered Minds. Yeah, I'm always a little nervous when I'm talking about things like this. I'm like, I hope I did this reasonably well. I'm sure you're referring to George, not me, but you didn't say I did anything wrong, so I guess I did okay. Trivia answer. Let's give that one. In this episode, we learn Golden Heart is the second best material for bows. Only Dragon Bone is superior. Who is the only person in this series we see use a Dragon Bone bow? Aggo, Dany's Blood Rider. He uses it really well. He saves her life at least once. He shoots Kahalo, or maybe not Kahalo, but one of the Blood Riders of Drogo. When Drogo's Blood Riders fight Dany's Blood Riders, she's almost killed by one of them, and it's Aggo who shoots him at the last second. So yeah, Aggo is valuable, and that Dragonbone bow is a gift from her. So he is well equipped. I really wonder what his maximum range is. I want to see him really use that thing to its greatest effect. Maybe one day we'll see that. Certainly, we didn't get much Blood Rider action on the TV show, so more of them is to be hoped for, as well as more from the Summer Islanders in the books going forward, rather. We mentioned a lot of episodes that relate to this one. We have a Sun Chaser episode. If you want more about exploration and more to follow up on that story, check that one out. The Nymeria series, especially the second one, is where the Summer Islanders come up in it. Our episode on Old Gis, our episodes on Valyria touch on a lot of these things. We have an episode on the Basilisk Isles. We have an episode on Nath. We have an episode on Aegon IV, which talks about the Black Pearl. We have multiple episodes on the Ninepenny Kings, where you can hear about the Ebon Prince. We have episodes on Lomas Longstrider and the Wonders of the World, which also touch on Tall Trees Town and a few other things like that. There are certainly more episodes that involve Summer Islanders that I didn't mention, but that is a very good place to start, that list of 10 or so that I just gave you. Thanks again to Nina. Check out Good Queen Alley for more of her great takes. Thanks to Joey Townsend for our great intro music. Thanks to Michael Klarfeld for the video intro and the maps you see behind me. You can find him at klaradox.de. That's claradox.de. On behalf of Ashea, we'll see you next time, and you know what to do. Valar Rereadus!